Chapter 169. The weather was getting colder. After an entire night of rain, the air was much fresher the next day. Baiji pushed open the window. On the branches in front of the window, there were still droplets of rain left over from last night's rain, sparkling and translucent, as they fell into the soil below. The room was immediately filled with the unique fragrance of soil after a rain. Jiang Ruan washed up and had breakfast. She walked to the window, and Lu Zhu hurriedly entered the room. She placed the cup of rose tea on the table, blinked her eyes at Jiang Ruan, and suddenly said in a low voice, "Miss, de Furen is gone." Jiang Ruan replied with an N and sat down on a chair by the window. The rose tea that Lu Zhu brought back looked extremely fresh and tasty, emitting a faint pink. Under the morning sun, it looked even more moist and lovely. She slowly picked up a piece, her snow-white fingertips holding the pastry, revealing a unique charm. Lu Zhu continued, "Second miss is also gone, and fifth Yang is also gone." 3 people had died in succession, but Jiang Ruan's expression did not change in the slightest, as if she had already predicted the outcome. A trace of weariness seemed to flash through her eyes, but it was so fleeting that no one noticed it. Wang Ye's spies saw it with their own eyes. Lu Zhu was somewhat anxious about Jiang Ruan's reaction, and quickly said, "It was second young master who brought his men to find second miss, but somehow killed her." When he returned to the Fu, he told Laoi that second miss had been kidnapped by bandits and committed suicide. As for fifth Yang, she died by swallowing gold. Lu Zhu thought about it. De Furen is a little strange. I heard that last night, second young master went to the residence to visit Furen, and in the middle of the night, he was found committing suicide with a piece of white silk. However, for the time being, Laoi did not allow this matter to be made public. Jiang Ruan said faintly, "It is not strange. Now that the Fu has come, 3 people have died. Honging is one thing, but there is only one Yang. The sudden death of the Jiang Fu's second miss and the Jiang Fu's Furen will inevitably lead to speculation. Now that the rumors about the Jiang Fu are widespread in the capital, my father is very cautious and will naturally not add fuel to the fire at this time." Lu Zhu suddenly understood, so that's how it is. But why did de Furen commit suicide? Also, that second young master, in order to free second young miss, he killed her. This is really too much. A trace of ridicule flashed through Jiang Ruan's eyes, and her tone was frighteningly cold. He did not do this for the sake of freeing Jiang Su as soon as possible. He just doesn't want Jiang Su to become a stumbling block in his career. As long as Jiang Su is alive, she may become evidence that he will be criticized by others in the future. My second brother wholeheartedly wants to climb up, so of course, he will destroy this evidence with his own hands. Dewdrop sucked in a breath of cold air. She hadn't thought of this much. This was because no matter how Jiang Chao and his sister treated Jiang Ruan, the 2 of them would always stand on the same front. The affection between siblings was not fake. Who would have thought that Jiang Chao would abandon and kill his own sister for his own selfish desires? This was truly terrifying. Although Dewdrop was born in the streets and was more knowledgeable than Baiji and Lian Xiao, she was, after all, kind-hearted by nature. She could not associate herself with such dark and filthy things. She had always held the view that humans were good by nature. However, Jiang Ruan was different. To a certain extent, she was extremely suspicious of human nature and firmly believed that humans were evil by nature. Things that were difficult for others to consider, when it came to her, would naturally occur to her. She continued, "As for Furen's death, it was only because of second brother's instigation. Now, second brother can be considered to have broken a jar and smashed it. He does not care about the path of retreat, so he obviously wants to go all out. I'm afraid that very soon, he will be doing something big." When Dewdrop heard Jiang Ruan's words, she was startled and said, "Then, are they preparing to deal with Miss? I'm just afraid that they won't make a move." Jiang Ruan smiled faintly, but that smile, in Dewdrop's eyes, was somewhat cold. She said, "I also want to see who will be the winner in this battle." Dewdrop did not speak, but after a moment, as if she suddenly thought of something, she said, "Miss, Nabi heard from Jiner that in less than 10 days, Xiao Wangye will be going to war. Jiang Ruan slightly paused and lowered her eyes. 10 days, so fast. Xiao Xiao was reading a report in his study. The military intelligence that had been sent from the frontier on horseback was full of danger everywhere. Just by looking at it, one could already feel the tension of the situation. Jiang Xing's whereabouts were unknown, and Guan Lianghan was injured. The morale of the army was at a low ebb, and the Jin army had, for some unknown reason, repeatedly changed their tactics, attacking with the element of surprise. If this continued, the remaining soldiers would be completely wiped out. On his left was a map of the army's formation. Even if they were 1,000 miles away, they still had to control the overall situation. Everyone knew that Jinying Wang was a young hero who commanded 300,000 genie guards, but no one had seen his wisdom in deciding victory from 1,000 miles away and strategizing strategies. It would take more than a month to travel from the capital to the frontier. Now, he could only temporarily pick up a brush and write down a defensive plan to send to the frontier. For the time being, he could temporarily hold on until he personally arrived on the battlefield and then kill the enemy while they were unprepared. The room was silent, and all the genie guards had retreated. He had not slept a wink all night as he carefully studied the enemy's formation. Up until now, he had not eaten anything. Suddenly, the door was pushed open. Xiao Xiao frowned as he smelled the aroma of food. When he saw who it was, he was slightly stunned. Jiang Ruan had come by herself with snacks and porridge. These days, although she had been living in the Jinying Wang Fu, the two of them had scrupulously observed etiquette and had not done anything that crossed the line. Moreover, Xiao Xiao was usually very elusive. During the day, he would be running around outside, and at night, he would come back to study military tactics and formations. The two of them rarely met. Jiang Ruan's temperament was even more cold and cheerless. Her days in the Jinying Wang Fu were considered comfortable, but she was not even willing to leave the courtyard. Unexpectedly, Jiang Ruan had come in person. While Xiao Xiao was slightly startled, Jiang Ruan had already walked to his side and put down the snacks and porridge. She said, "The kitchen made osmanthus cake and chicken porridge. They are not too sweet, but I have tasted them and they taste very good." She did all of this very naturally, as if she had done it 1,000 times. Xiao Xiao glanced at her but did not move. "You have not eaten for a day." Jiang Ruan said, "Do you want to starve to death in your own fu?" Jiang Ruan usually treated people warmly, and she always maintained a smiling expression on her face. This made her facial features appear vivid and beautiful. However, upon closer inspection, that smile did not reach the depths of her eyes. It was as if it was only an extremely well-made mask. In the end, it made people feel a faint sense of alienation. Moreover, the times when her emotions were exposed were extremely few. Even when facing Jiang Xian, she mostly had a comforting expression. She had never shown any particularly displeased expression. Deep down, she was a person who clearly distinguished between love and hate, but whether it was love or hate, it was always hidden under a smiling expression. This made her smile somewhat thought-provoking. Although it was the same smile, the meaning it conveyed was generally different. For example, right now, she was clearly smiling, but the rebuke and displeasure in her gaze was ultimately seen by a certain someone. Xiao Xiao made an "oh" sound and silently took the spoon from Jiang Ruan's hand. He slowly scooped a mouthful of porridge and tasted it. Normally, he did not feel that there was anything special to eat, but for some reason, today, he felt that it was exceptionally delicious. Xiao Xiao was in a good mood and very quickly finished the porridge. Even the pastries that he usually did not eat were also finished. Jiang Ruan was very satisfied with Xiao Xiao's tactfulness. She sat opposite him and said, "I heard that you are going to go to war soon." Her question was so blunt, but Xiao Xiao did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. He replied, "Yes. You must be careful." Jiang Ruan thought about it and still exhorted him. In the end, in the future, she would still have to marry this person in front of her, no matter what he was like. Now, It seemed that Xiao Xiao had always helped her unconditionally. In this life, she no longer trusted people easily, but Xiao Xiao was an exception. She paused and said, "I will guard Jinying Wang Fu for you." Xiao Xiao was once again shocked by her words and could not help but raise his eyes to look at her. Xiao Xiao was very clear about what kind of person Jiang Wan was. From the first time he met her, Xiao Xiao could clearly see that this young girl was calm and decisive, ruthless and merciless, full of hostility. She seemed to have a lot of secrets and stubbornly sealed her heart in a corner. She seemed to be a heartless person, but in reality, she was not. For Jiang Xing, she had risked her life and risked everything. In order to protect the Zhao family, she had not hesitated to alienate herself. Even Xian Pei, whom she had only met once in the palace, had lent a helping hand. She was actually a very protective person, but there were too few people that she could protect. Today, her words were actually a promise. This was a promise to him. She was saying that Jinying Wang Fu would henceforth become a part of her responsibility. "I will guard it for you." The young girl in front of him had bright eyes and sharp teeth. She was born with a picturesque appearance. Unlike Jiang Su's elegant beauty, there was not a single one of her facial features that was not exquisite. Now that she had gradually shed her childishness, she had already revealed a bit of peerless elegance. That pair of eyes that were as lustrous as the clear spring water of a mountain stream seemed to be faintly hooked at the end of her eyes, forming an absolutely beautiful charm. And when she smiled faintly, it seemed as if even the sunset clouds in the sky were reflected in her eyes. Xiao Xiao believed that he had seen countless beauties in his life. At this moment, he could not help but admit that the young girl in front of him was indeed worthy of the 4 words, a demoness that brought calamity to the country. If she had the ambition to seduce him with all her heart, she would have met the emperor who adored beauties. Perhaps, because of her, he would have overturned the country. "You do not need to do these things." Xiao Xiao looked at her and said, "Jinying Wang Fu will protect you. If it is unable to protect you, you do not need to waste your energy on this matter." Jiang Wan was a person who was protective of her own people, and Xiao Xiao was even more so. At that time, the 300,000 embroidered guards did not have a leader. Xiao Xiao was still young, so the emperor did not dare to easily hand over power to him. The embroidered guards became a hot potato. At that time, everyone said that such an elite troop was only loyal to Jinying Wang Fu, and that it would be too difficult to truly subdue them. Everyone guessed that the emperor ultimately regretted disbanding this group of troops. Under the clamor of such rumors, the days of the embroidered guards became exceptionally difficult. The soldiers of the army that they had previously suppressed began to throw stones at them when they were down. At that time, it was Xiao Xiao himself who stood up and used the condition that he had gone deep into the southern frontier to kill the leader of the southern frontier to protect the embroidered guards. He could overturn a Wang Fu for the sake of a small hidden guard of the embroidered guards, and he could also fight to the death with the nobles for the sake of the wrongful death of one of his subordinates. Xiao Xiao's protective nature was well known, and because of this, the embroidered guards respected him, loved him, and were willing to go through water and tread on fire for him. With Xiao Xiao's temperament, and now that Jiang Wan was his future wife, he naturally included Jiang Wan under his wing to protect her. He did not want Jiang Wan to be hurt for some empty things. The fact that she had made this promise had already made him very surprised. "No, Xiao Xiao." Jiang Wan refused. "This is not a dispensable Wang Fu. This is Jinying Wang Fu, the place where your father and mother live. It is the credit and pride of the old Jinying Wang, the dignity of the Xiao family. Even if this dynasty falls, it cannot be trampled on." She softly said, "I will not let it be trampled on." Xiao Xiao was startled, and an indescribable complex feeling suddenly welled up in his heart. Jinying Wang Fu. When people mentioned Jinying Wang Fu and Jinying Wang, they would only think of the old Jinying Wang's rebellion. A bad person could do 1,000 bad things, but as long as he did one good thing, he would be a good person. A good person could do 1,000 good things, but if he did one bad thing, all his previous good deeds would be erased. For so many years, he had protected the Shao family and the embroidered guards. The people were afraid of his power, but they had never sincerely respected him. People were always forgetful. They had forgotten who had led these embroidered guards, who had been scolded as traitors, to fight against the foreign clans and maintain the balance of this dynasty in the past. Amidst the flowers, the contributions of the ancestors became more and more splendid, but those who had charged and broken through the enemy lines gradually disappeared. And she said that this matter was the credit and pride of the old Jinying Wang, the dignity of the Shao family. Even if this dynasty fell, it could not be trampled on. At this moment, the shock in his heart could not be expressed in words. His actions were faster than his reason. He grabbed Jiang Ruan's hand and pulled her into his embrace. Jiang Ruan was slightly stunned. She was already in Xiao Xiao's embrace. She was lying on Xiao Xiao's chest, and she felt Xiao Xiao's chin resting on the top of her head. The young man's voice was slightly heavy, and there was a trace of a sigh as he said, "Thank you." Jiang Ruan's heart was moved. She thought about it, hesitated for a moment, and then also reached out to hug his waist. She said, "No need to thank me. Since I have married here, this is my responsibility." Xiao Xiao slowly loosened his grip, and Jiang Ruan struggled free from his embrace. Before she could stand up, Xiao Xiao pinched her chin. She was stunned and looked up at Xiao Xiao. However, she found that the other party was also staring at her. This young man was born with peerless elegance, and he even had a rare heroic spirit. However, he usually had a faint coldness, which gave people a sense of alienation that kept people at a distance of 1,000 miles. However, when his brows softened, his entire person had a gentle beauty. His eyelashes were long and straight, and when they hung down, they formed a graceful arc. The most moving thing was his pair of black eyes, which were like a starry sky sprinkled with broken diamonds. In the heavy night, they suddenly forced out endless brilliance, almost dazzling people's eyes. At this moment, he was pinching Jiang Ruan's chin, and his body was slightly leaning forward. His thin lips were slightly raised, and suddenly, an endless romantic feeling was born. She felt that this cold late autumn day suddenly had a pressing spring light. The young man's features were like a painting, and his appearance was exceptional. However, he had already slowly leaned over with a firm and unstoppable posture. Jiang Ruan was slightly stunned, and only felt that her body was somewhat stiff. She wanted to directly avoid him, but when she met those ink-black starry eyes, she did not know why, but she did not move. This young man, although he seemed cold, he was actually very sentimental. His face was cold, but his heart was warm. He was powerful, so he lived his life unscrupulously. In her previous life, she had been too far away from him, but in this life, by a freak combination of factors, they had walked so close. He did not pressure her. Like a drop of water, or a cloud, he surrounded her step by step, and walked into her life. She had tried to resist, but found that she could do nothing about it. She had a tenacious temperament, but the other was not a weak person. In this life, he had silently helped her, and refused a mutually beneficial cooperation. He was not a person who was simply used. Jiang Ruan slowly closed her eyes. She did not refuse. His kiss fell on her lips, like a dragonfly touching the surface of the water, and then he quickly retreated. He was, after all, a gentleman. Jiang Ruan slowly opened her eyes, and she saw a little joy in the young man's eyes, as well as an affection that could not be concealed. That shallow layer of affection caused a layer of ripples to slowly rise in her heart, and then, like a short knife, it slowly grinded against her heart. He was such a good person, and his affection was so genuine and not hypocritical. But, why did it have to be in this life? If it had been in her previous life, she would still have been that naive, almost stupid girl who had endless hope for love. When she faced Xiao Xiao, she would have loved him wholeheartedly, and would have returned his sincere love. But the heavens were always wrong, and the one Xiao Xiao met was this cold-blooded, heartless, vengeful, and not loving. In her heart, a bit of self-loathing and despair of abandoning herself suddenly grew. Xiao Xiao noticed her expression and was slightly stunned. Once again, he lifted her chin and forced her to look up at him. "What's wrong?" he asked with a frown. Jiang Yuan looked at him and suddenly smiled. "Xiao Xiao, do you regret asking the Empress Dowager to bestow marriage?" "I don't regret it." Xiao Xiao looked at him. No matter how calm he usually was, when faced with the girl he admired, he was always like a young boy who had his first awakening of love. He could not guess the complex thoughts of women, and he had never bothered to guess before, so he did not understand why Jiang Yuan was suddenly depressed. His fiancée had always had an excellent way of concealing her emotions. For example, at this moment, he clearly felt a flash of depression and loathing from Jiang Yuan, but in a flash, she returned to her previous smiling and calm appearance. Jiang Yuan suddenly reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer to her, and hugged him tightly. Xiao Xiao was slightly startled by Jiang Yuan's sudden initiative. After a moment of hesitation, he reached out and gently patted her back, as if he was comforting a frightened small animal. Jiang Yuan rested her head on his shoulder. He could not see Jiang Yuan's expression, so naturally, he had no way of knowing what kind of decision his fiancée had made at this moment. This person was too good. Jiang Yuan closed her eyes, so good that she could not bear to hurt him. Since he had said he would not regret it, in this life, he would not have the chance to regret it. She was willing to let go of the knot in her heart and try. Regardless of whether it was affectionate or heartless, naturally, she would not let him regret it. Chapter 170. 10 days later, Xiao Xiao led 100,000 brocade guards out to Tianjin. Old General Zhao and the 3 sons of the Zhao family also set out. However, the Zhao family army was headed for Shirong. Recently, the Shirong people had repeatedly caused trouble at the border, so it was inevitable that they would have other ideas. The emperor's thoughts were hard to fathom. It was unknown why the emperor had sent the Zhao family out at this time. The Zhao family currently only had Zhao Yi, Zhao Yulong, and Zhao Feizhou. Naturally, they would not be able to raise any waves. However, the 3 of them did not have much influence. If someone were to hit the Zhao family while they were down at this critical juncture, the Zhao family would probably be badly battered. However, no one dared to defy the emperor's edict. The Zhao family was loyal and courageous, so they had no reason to refuse. That day, they left the city with the brocade guards led by Xiao Xiao. Jinying Wang led the army, but there was still a fiancé waiting to be married in the house. According to the customs of the Great Jin dynasty, when an unmarried woman went to war with her husband, she could stay in her future husband's fu. The Empress Dowager took pity on Hong and Junzhu and issued an edict, allowing her to stay in Jinying Wang's fu. Hong and Junzhu's maiden family, the minister's fu, encountered several incidents in succession. First, Minister Jiang accidentally injured his Yinyang, and the Yinyang ended up injuring her health and passed away soon after. Later, the lost second miss was found. She had been kidnapped by mountain bandits, and in order to protect her innocence, she committed suicide. A beauty of a generation passed away. Although Jiang Su's reputation was not very good when she was alive, death could forgive everything, and people were always particularly tolerant of beauties. The most shocking thing was that the Jiang family's eldest madam had been ill for a long time, and finally died. Eldest Madame Xia Shi's maiden family did not wait for 3 months before sending over a distant cousin. The Jiang Fu welcomed a new madam. Originally, people thought that after Dr. Jiang's death, the last connection between the Jiang family and the Xia family would be severed. Unexpectedly, the Xia family personally sent over a new madam. The marriage alliance between the Xia family and the Jiang family was maintained, and many people who had come to watch the excitement were suddenly left empty-handed. However, although the relationship between Xia Yan and the Jiang family did not break, Minister Jiang was criticized by the common people, especially when the imperial censor's impeachment memorials flew to the emperor's desk one after another. Every word and sentence was accusing Minister Jiang of marrying a new wife before the corpse of senior official Jiang had even been found. This was not the way of a man of love. For so many years, the Jiang family had stood tall and firm in the imperial court, and its reputation among the common people was upright and honest. But now, it was slowly being ruined. Now, Jiang Quan's method of marrying a new wife had completely ruined the last shred of good reputation. From then on, when people mentioned the minister's mansion, it was no longer an upright and clean noble family, but a muddle-headed official with a restless inner courtyard. These changes seeped into the environment bit by bit. It did not seem to attract people's attention, and it seemed that even the host did not realize this. However, a 1,000-mile dike could be destroyed by an ant's nest. All the seemingly insignificant little things would eventually lead to a series of events, and this was just the beginning. If there was anything worth being happy about in the capital, it was that the previous structure of the imperial harem had now been completely disrupted. The positions of the 3 concubines were now vacant, and a new batch of beautiful women were gradually being promoted. There were a few who were now extremely popular. These 3 people were the Hanlin family's young Miss Wang Lianhe, the heroic Marquis's first branch's Shu daughter Mu Shiro, and the Jiang family's 4th Shu daughter Jiang Dan. When the emperor's foundation was not stable, the number of women he doted on was more or less related to the power and status behind them, and represented the power of a certain household. When the emperor's great cause had been established, and nothing could shake his country and status, he would no longer dote on women with illustrious family backgrounds. On the contrary, the emperor would choose those women who had no foundation, or even no background, as his favorites, because they were weak and helpless, and could not raise any waves. Only by relying on the emperor's favor could they survive in the palace. Since ancient times, the emperor had always been suspicious. Only this kind of woman was completely harmless, and would not have other thoughts. These people either had family power that was just an empty shell, without any real power, or were just insignificant Shu daughters who were not valued by their families. Therefore, to the emperor, they were the kind of people who posed no threat at all. These 3 truly stood out from the crowd of beautiful women. Wang Lianhe was the most poetic and was the emperor's flower of understanding. Her personality was gentle and graceful, like a beautiful woman holding an umbrella in the misty rain of Jiangnan. She was somewhat similar to imperial concubine Chen. Mu Shiro was the most beautiful, like an orchid blooming in the valley. However, her personality was a bit too cold, and she treated the emperor with the same indifference. However, it was this cold and indifferent appearance that aroused the emperor's interest. She was now a famous cold beauty in the palace. Out of the 3, Jiang Dan's appearance was the least outstanding, and her personality did not seem to be a gentle and understanding person. Back then, her encounter with the emperor was somewhat coincidental. That night, she prayed to the moon in the courtyard. Every word and sentence was for the safety of her family. Her words were simple and honest. The emperor was used to seeing all kinds of beauties, but it was rare to see such a simple and innocent woman. He hid his identity and talked with her for a night. He felt that this woman's personality was bright, and the next day, he sent someone to give her an imperial edict of promotion. Now, these 3 people had jumped from little beauties to 4th-ranked beauties. For a concubine's daughter, this was reaching the heavens in one step. Right now, the most favored one was Wang Lianhe, and the last one the emperor was interested in was Mu Shiro. After Jiang Dan was promoted, she was not summoned by the emperor. However, she did not feel discouraged and still lived happily. Jiang Dan's servants in the palace were anxious and hoped that their mistress would be favored. They urged her to think of a way to see the emperor again to prevent him from stealing her favor. However, Jiang Dan did not know. She was still busy with her own matters and lived a leisurely and contented life. Seeing this, the palace servants were anxious. On this day, Jiang Dan was admiring the flowers in the garden of the palace. Perhaps she was tired, so she went to the pavilion to sit down and rest. She seemed to feel a little tired and suddenly became interested. She ordered the servants to pick up some fallen flowers and store them. She also wanted to see if they could gather some morning dew so that she could brew her own 100 flowers wine. Perhaps she felt that the palace servants were not doing their best, so she simply lifted her skirt and stood up, mixing in with the palace servants. She was still enjoying herself and did not notice that on the other side of the garden, there was a person standing far away, closely watching her movements. Jiang Chao lowered his head and said to Xian Li, who was standing in front of him, "Your Highness, have you thought it through?" Is it really her? He was a bit hesitant. Your Highness, why don't you change the person? Jiang Dan is really too risky to use her. Xianli narrowed his eyes slightly and slowly said, Oh? You said risky. What do you think of her? Jiang Chao thought for a bit, as if he was trying his best to remember anything related to Jiang Dan. However, his relationship with this fourth sister was usually very weak and he could not think of anything. After a moment, he shook his head and said, This fourth sister of mine, she was born of a concubine and was raised by the late Madame Side since she was young. Her personality is also very weak. Normally, in the Fu, even if one speaks too loudly, she will scare her. She is really not useful. After a pause, he continued, and she is also not very smart. Why did your Highness choose her to be one of us? Xianli shook his head. Jiang Chao, do you know why you have been by my side for so long, but you have not been able to reach a better position time and time again? Why can't you grasp the opportunities one give you? Instead, you let others take advantage of you? Jiang Chao's heart trembled and he said seriously, Your Highness, please advise me. You are ruthless and have your ways of doing things. Unfortunately, you are too conceited. Xianli shook his head. You have never seriously observed the people around you, so you underestimate them. For example, you are now underestimating this Jiang Dan in front of you. Your Highness, this subordinate does not understand. Jiang Chao said, Even if my fourth sister entered the palace and became a beauty, that was because my father was playing around with her and she was lucky. But she has no ambition. Didn't your Highness say that people without ambition are not useful? This fourth sister of mine has clearly received the Emperor's decree to promote her, but she does not know how to fight for it herself and wasted a good opportunity. As a result, among the three beauties, Wang Lian, and Mu Shiro are more favored than her. Xianli shook his head. This is where you are wrong. You only saw Minister Jiang send Jiang Dan to the palace, but did you not see how much effort Jiang Dan put in? Do you really think that Jiang Dan's encounter with Imperial Father was just a coincidence and that Jiang Dan's luck was good, just like what others have said? Jiang Chao did not speak. It was not that he did not have doubts, but Jiang Dan was too useless in his heart, so useless that he could not even suspect her. With Jiang Dan's personality and skills, how could she scheme against the ruler of a country? See, this is where you are wrong. Xianli sighed. I think Minister Jiang is quite good at raising his daughter. The first miss and fourth miss of the Jiang family are really 1 in a million. He looked at Jiang Chao with a smile that did not seem like a smile. This fourth sister of yours is a poisonous snake. I'm afraid she knows how to endure and hide better than you. Look, he nodded in Jiang Dan's direction. Jiang Chao followed his gaze and saw Jiang Dan laughing happily with the palace maids. She did not seem to have the airs of a palace beauty. His heart moved, and he saw a bright yellow figure slowly walk over from behind Jiang Dan. It was the Emperor. Today, the Emperor had only casually walked through the garden, but he heard the laughter of a woman from afar. That voice was as sweet as a silver bell, as if he could be infected by the joy in it. His heart moved, and he deliberately walked in a circle, wanting to see who it was. He was a little stunned when he saw a woman standing among the palace maids, holding a flower basket in one hand and a whole begonia that had just fallen from the branch in the other. There was a faint smile on her face, and her eyes curved into crescent moons, sparkling and very cute. She wore a peach-colored embroidered skirt with a small jade-colored blouse, bright and threatening, and had a unique charm of youth. Her appearance could only be considered dainty, but her every movement seemed to have a unique dainty charm. That dainty charm did not seem artificial, and was natural and full of life. Even among the crowd of palace maids, people would notice her at a glance. The Emperor walked forward and said, "What is your name?" The woman seemed to jump in fright and turned around. The moment she saw the Emperor, she blushed. Perhaps she had laughed for a long time, but there were some glistening beads of sweat on her forehead, making her appear very cute. She lowered her head, as if she was at a loss and panicked. After a pause, she said, This concubine is called Jiang Dan. It's you, As she spoke, the emperor had already recognized her face. The person who accompanied me the entire night was you. The emperor was busy every day, and he had seen too many beauties in his daily life. There were countless beauties with both beauty and skill. There were 3 palaces, 6 courtyards, and 72 concubines in the palace, and which one of them was not the best? Thus, it was difficult for anyone to leave a mark in his heart. That night, that simple and unadorned young girl had only been a fleeting glimpse in the emperor's heart. He had raised her rank, but he had forgotten about her. Now that he had suddenly met her, she gave him a breathtaking feeling. It was difficult for the emperor not to pay attention to Jiang Dan at this time. If the previous time was just a preview, then the current Jiang Dan had already left a unique impression in the emperor's heart. This impression was completely different from Beauty Wang and Beauty Mu. The emperor, who was used to seeing beautiful flowers and ice beauties, now began to feel a sense of freshness in this dainty charm. He smiled and said, "Get up, walk with me." In the distance, Xianli raised his eyebrows. "See? This is your 4th sister's method." Jiang Chao stared in disbelief at Jiang Dan, who was walking shoulder to shoulder with the emperor. Just now, in that instant, her smile was dainty and cute, and even he couldn't help but be shocked. This 4th sister only had one kind of expression in the Fu, and that was fear and fear. But just now, he was confused and almost thought that the Jiang Dan he usually saw was not the same person. It's not that she doesn't want to fight, she's brewing. Xianli smiled slightly and said, "She is good at lying low. She won't do anything that she can't guarantee. Just wait and see. This beauty Jiang will soon be favored." But Jiang Chao suppressed the shock in his heart and asked, "Why would she cooperate with us?" "She has ambition in her eyes," Xianli said. "People with ambition will not be timid. Jiang Chao, when you have time, walk around with your 4th sister. She will definitely be moved because she wants to reach a higher position. And we also need someone who can speak up in front of Imperial Father." When Imperial Consort Chen was present, he was successful in every endeavor. Because Imperial Consort Chen only needed to say pillow talk and the emperor would feel pity for him. But now that Imperial Consort Chen had lost her power, the only remaining empress and consort Xian would not speak up for him. The emperor's attitude towards him was becoming more and more distant. Xianli, who had always acted calmly, was already feeling anxious. "Yes, Your Highness." Jiang Chao lowered his head. "That Jinying Wang and Zhao Guang have already set off for more than 2 months and should have reached the battlefield by now. The scouts at the front reported yesterday that the situation is already under control. If this goes on..." He did not continue. The smoother the situation at the front was, the more disadvantageous it would be for them. They could not hand over such a great merit to Jinying Wang. Xiao Xiao had already made it clear that he would not stand on their side. Such a person could not be used, only destroyed. "No need to worry," Xianli said indifferently, "they can't win this battle and will definitely lose. What's the point of paying attention?" A murderous look flashed in his eyes as he stroked his sleeves. "Inform Xia Cheng that he can start." "Your Highness." Jiang Chao was shocked. "So soon? A long night is fraught with dreams." Xianli sneered. In Jinying Wang's Fu, Jiang Ruan was sitting in Xiao Xiao's study, reading a book. She had been living in Jinying Wang's Fu for 2 months, and the servants here had changed their ways to make her stay comfortable. Perhaps it was because it was too comfortable that she almost unconsciously got used to life here. In these 2 months, she had returned to the Fu to perform mourning for Xia Yan and Jiang Su Su, and had also seen the Jiang Fu's new Furen, Xia Wei, a beauty with a smiling tiger's face. However, now that she was no longer living in the Jiang Fu, these things had nothing to do with her. Xiao Xiao's study was like a treasure trove, with all kinds of books. The place that Jiang Ruan spent the most time in was Xiao Xiao's study. She had read Xiao Xiao's personal notes, and the more she read, the more she wrung her wrists. She had originally had some suspicions, but gradually, some clues began to surface. However, she did not continue to speculate. Everyone had their own secrets, and Xiao Xiao also had his. Now, she was more concerned about the war in Tianjin. In her previous life, at this time, she was in the midst of the abyss of struggle in the palace, so she did not pay much attention to the war in Tianjin. In the letter she wrote to Jiang Xing, she had already recalled all the things that could help Jiang Xing. As for the rest, she was really powerless. However, there was one thing that she could be sure of, and that was that Xian Li would definitely take action at this time. Now that the Zhao family was weak and Xiao Xiao was not in the capital, with Xian Li's temperament of taking advantage of people's difficulties, he would definitely not let go of this good opportunity. The structure of the imperial court was at a sensitive time, and even the slightest movement could lead to earth-shattering changes. She could roughly guess what Xian Li wanted to do. As she was pondering, she heard the guard outside say, "Fourth young master, young madam is inside." A slightly low male voice said, "It's nothing, I'll just go in and take a look." The door was pushed open with a creak, and Jiang Ruan quietly looked at the person who had come. The person had come suddenly, and she was also somewhat curious about the rumored young madam. As soon as she opened the door, she saw a young girl sitting upright in front of the desk, quietly looking at her against the light. Her appearance was somewhat unreal against the sunlight, and only a pair of clear and far-sighted eyes seemed to contain some kind of mockery of reality as she calmly and indifferently gazed at him. Somewhat unable to withstand the gaze of that pair of eyes, the person touched her nose and coughed. "Third sister-in-law. I am Qi Si, third older brother asked me to come." Jiang Ruan's eyes flashed, and she also sized up the person opposite her. This was also a young man of about 20 years of age, dressed in a purple robe embroidered with lotus flowers. He could be considered to be delicate and elegant, but for some reason, he had a ring of beard around his mouth and chin. It was somewhat abrupt, as if a beautiful youth had been ruined without rhyme or reason. However, his smile was gentle, and his eyes were long and somewhat peach blossom-like eyes. However, there was no frivolity in his gaze, and he had a proper appearance. This was Xiao Xiao's fellow disciple, Qi Feng, who was ranked 4th. In Jianan Mountain, he had learned the art of politics in the imperial court. Unfortunately, this skill could not be easily learned. All these years, he had been secretly assisting Xiao Xiao in assisting the embroidered uniform guard. Now that Xiao Xiao had summoned him back to the capital, it was quite unexpected. Qi Si seriously sized up Jiang Ruan and suddenly laughed. "Third sister-in-law is indeed an outstanding beauty. Originally, I thought that third older brother was making a big fuss over a minor issue by summoning Xia Wu and me back to the capital to protect third sister-in-law. Now, it seems that it is fourth younger brother's good fortune." Chapter 171. In the capital, a small butterfly flapping its wings could only create a small, almost invisible gust of wind. When these thousands of strands of wind gathered together, whether or not it could become an irresistible storm tens of thousands of li away, no one knew. However, at this moment, the subtle changes that had occurred in the capital did not seem to have reached the battlefield tens of thousands of li away. This was a vast and boundless desert. The desert was littered with starry grass. The vegetation here was not rich, so there were not many cattle and sheep grazing here. At a glance, it was just a tent set up for a battle. These tents were covered with thick linoleum jars to prevent people from freezing at night. In the innermost part of these tents that were arranged in a unique square formation, there was a tent that was very strange. This tent appeared very luxurious, and there were even thick tassels on top. However, there were no less than 10 guards standing guard outside. These people's clothes were slightly different from the Dejin's, and they seemed to have a strong demeanor of a foreign race. A young girl dressed in an emerald green dress walked in with a basket in her hand. Upon seeing this, the guard outside let her pass. The young girl kept her head down the entire way. After entering the tent, she silently placed the food basket in her hands on the table and took out plates of food from inside. After everything was arranged, she said in a low voice, "Deputy General Jiang, this servant is Jean I am the new servant girl to serve you. You should eat something." The man sitting on the chair in the tent raised his head, revealing a handsome face. His complexion was slightly pale, and there was a green stubble on his chin, but he did not seem to be in a sorry state. Instead, there was a kind of carefree and unrestrained air about him. When he heard the young girl's voice, he was slightly surprised. After a while, he said, "You can speak official language? Are you from the Great Jin's capital?" The young girl lowered her head and said in a low voice, "This servant is from the Great Jin's capital. I was captured by the people of the southern border. Those people wanted to find someone to serve master, so they sent this servant here." Jiang Xianji's gaze slowly fell on the young girl. The young girl was not very old, around 16 or 17 years old. Her skin could be considered delicate, and her eyes were big and lively. However, there was an obvious burn scar on her left cheek, abruptly destroying the beauty of her face, making her look exceptionally terrifying. It must be because of this face that she was sent here to serve him, the captive. Otherwise, if it was a young girl who was as pretty as a flower, she would have long been eaten up by the soldiers here without leaving any bones behind. Jiang Xianji narrowed his eyes. "You're from the capital. How did you end up here?" Jean stared blankly for a moment before replying, "This servant is a maid who follows the Great Jin dynasty's army and works in the laundry room. A few nights ago, I went out with a few sisters and coincidentally encountered a group of soldiers who captured us and brought us back." There were no loopholes in his words. There would indeed be a group of women accompanying the army, who would be used for daily necessities such as mending and cleaning. These women usually lived in other places, so Jiang Xianji naturally couldn't see them one by one. As for going out at night and encountering a group of soldiers, it was not impossible. However, as Jiang Xianji listened to the young girl's words, he felt that something was wrong. He couldn't pinpoint it, so he could only slowly frown. It had been several months since he had been captured and brought here. He didn't know what had happened outside. These people who had captured him treated him with courtesy, enticing him with high positions and generous salaries. Every day, they would give him a muscle-weakening powder, making him unable to exert any strength, but they didn't kill him. He didn't know what these people wanted, but every day, he was thinking of a way to escape. He said, "Since you were captured and brought here a few days ago, you should know how the war outside is going." The people who had captured him had isolated him from the outside world, so he had no way of knowing the specific situation of the war. He also didn't know how the Great Jin dynasty's army was doing. When he had been captured, Guanliang Han had also been hit by an arrow. That arrow had been very deep, and presumably, it wouldn't have healed overnight. The army couldn't go a day without a general. The war was in imminent danger. General Guan is seriously injured and can no longer lead the army into battle. Jin said in a low voice, "Currently, the Great Jin dynasty is retreating step by step, and Tianjin is pressing forward. They have already forced the Great Jin army to the area around Heguan Cliff. However, Deputy General Jiang need not worry. This servant heard from the higher-ups that the court has already sent reinforcements. Jinying Wang is rushing over with 100,000 brocade guards." Jiang Xianji's brows were deeply furrowed as he listened, but when he heard the last sentence, he couldn't help but stare blankly. Jinying Wang. He slowly frowned. Since even Xiao Xiao had been sent over, it could be seen how tense the war situation was. Xiao Xiao was a hidden force of the Great Jin dynasty. It seemed that he had been born to resist some kind of power, and he usually hid in the dark. The emperor's tolerance toward Xiao Xiao might not have been without a reason. Jiang Xianji wasn't a fool. During the days he had fought alongside Guanliang Han, he could guess a little. Some of the servant girls were spies sent by the local authorities, but some were truly Great Jin people. They were even willing to risk their lives for him in order to rescue him from his cage. Unfortunately, they all died at the hands of these people in the end. As he spoke, a person walked in from outside the tent. He glanced at Jean but did not ask her to leave, clearly treating her like she was nothing. When the person saw Jiang Xianji's frown, he laughed. "Deputy General Jiang, you don't seem to be in a good mood today. What, do you think it's too stuffy here?" This person wore a gray robe that covered his entire body, revealing only a smooth and slender chin. His thin lips also looked very beautiful. Judging from the voice, it was a young man. His voice even carried a bit of gorgeous charm, but he did not know why. He said, "Deputy General Jiang, have you still not made up your mind? Sire does not need to waste too much effort on me." Jiang Xing smiled slightly, "I do not have what Sire wants on me." The person in gray slowly approached Jiang Xing. However, his voice contained a trace of a faintly discernible smile. It was like a gorgeous end string on a zither, with a somewhat itchy curve. However, it inexplicably caused one's heart to tremble, afraid that in the next moment, the resounding sound would snap the zither string. The person in gray said, "Deputy General Jiang, at this time, why do you need to hide anything? I just want to know, who gave you that letter?" That letter referred to the letter that Jiang Yuan had stuffed into his hands 3 years ago when they had parted. The letter had recorded in detail some of the tactics that Tianjin would use in the years of war with Tianjin, as well as some surprise attacks, and even the victories and defeats that would occur in the next few years. This letter had been of great help to Jiang Xing. In the past 3 years, he had studied this letter from time to time. Relying on this letter, he would beat the enemy at their own game or lure them into a trap. He had perfectly destroyed the enemy's surprise attacks again and again, and won victory after victory. However, there was a traitor in the army, and the traitor turned out to be Guan Lianghan's closest subordinate. This news had come too suddenly. More importantly, that subordinate had clearly understood the secret of this letter and had even secretly exchanged information with these people. This time, he had been schemed against by the other party. On one hand, he had been in danger, and on the other hand, an army of 100,000. He had no choice but to concede. Jiang Xing had no choice but to be captured, and Guan Lianghan had been seriously injured. And the contents of this letter were indeed enough to make the enemy go crazy. In the previous month, they had thought of all kinds of terrible ways to torture Jiang Xing, but Jiang Xing had not relented. Later, they had changed their minds and provided for Jiang Xing well, promising him a high position and generous salary, but Jiang Xing still had not relented. Jiang Xing was a person who was unmoved by force or persuasion. These people had presumably become very familiar with Jiang Xing's temperament over the past few months. But they had still chosen this method. There must have been some other purpose, but Jiang Xing could not think of it for the time being. But there was one thing that he absolutely could not reveal: Jiang Ruan's name. Sometimes, Jiang Xing himself also doubted how Jiang Ruan knew what might happen in the future. It seemed that ever since Jiang Ruan had been picked up from the rural residence and returned to the capital 3 years ago, he had had some strange feelings. In front of him, Jiang Ruan was nothing more than a young girl with a somewhat apathetic temperament. Perhaps she was also somewhat intelligent, but with the power of foresight, looking at the contents of the letter and recalling the past, such as the incident at the Bochang Reservoir, it was really puzzling. But no matter what, whether Jiang Ruan was a demon or a ghost, she was still his younger sister. He would absolutely not do anything to harm his younger sister. Once these people knew that the letter was written by Jiang Ruan, they would definitely think of ways to capture Jiang Ruan. There were traitors at Guan Lianghan's side, and it was not certain that there were no ambushes in the capital. He had to protect Jiang Ruan. I have already said this many times. Jiang Xing stretched out his index finger to support his head, and with an extremely mischievous appearance, he said, "I just randomly picked it up on the road. Perhaps it is the will of the heavens. If Sire must ask, there is no harm in asking the heavens. Perhaps the heavens feel that your Tianjin's destiny is nearing its end, and thus sent down a decree to help my great Jin. Since that is the case, seeing that Sire has treated me with sincerity these past few days, I will also give Sire a word of advice. There is no harm in complying with the will of the heavens, so that everyone can live comfortably, right?" He was such a calm and introverted person, but now he was speaking nonsense with a deadpan expression, and even putting on a slovenly appearance. However, this appearance not only did not make people feel disgusted, but instead made people feel that it was extremely interesting, and they could not help but want to get closer to him. Jean lowered her head, covering the trace of a smile that had quietly spilled out from the corners of her mouth. The gray-clothed man was not angry, and instead stood with his hands behind his back. He nodded his head and said, "I agree with Sire's words that the will of the heavens belongs to us, but the will of the heavens is not written by the heavens. Even if the heavens gave the great Jin dynasty a warning, this warning prophecy ultimately still fell into our hands. What kind of will of the heavens is this?" Jiang Xing was silent for a long time before he opened his mouth and said, "You are not people of Tianjin, you are people of the southern border." These people never talked about the affairs of Tianjin, and the soldiers were usually stationed here. Their attire was also not that of the soldiers of Tianjin at war. At first, Jiang Xing thought that they were a group of secret troops cultivated by Tianjin, but later he discovered that this was not the case. Instead, it made him think of the rumored southern border country. When the late emperor was still alive, the southern border invaded the Central Plains and almost occupied the entire Central Plains for themselves. Afterwards, the late emperor personally led the army and conquered the southern border country. The southern border country was destroyed, and the remaining southern border survivors were banished to the desolate borders of the Great Jin dynasty to settle down. Since Jiang Xing was born, he had lived in the capital and had never had the opportunity to see the southern border survivors. Now that he saw them, he had a faint suspicion in his heart. The gray-clothed man heard this and smiled lightly. His bright and clean chin slightly raised, drawing a strange arc. "Yes, we are people of the southern border." "So what? The people of this world will eventually become people of the southern border. This world will eventually belong to us." Jiang Xing shook his head. "If you want to dream, I won't hinder you. However, I have already answered your question. Now, if you have nothing else to do, you can go out. I want to rest." The gray-clothed man was not angry at Jiang Xing's words. He only smiled faintly and turned to leave the tent. On the contrary, it was Jean who nervously watched the gray-clothed man leave. After the gray-clothed man left Jiang Xing's tent, he walked to another tent in the opposite direction. This tent did not look gorgeous. From a distance, it was not even as bright as Jiang Xing's tent. The entire tent was snow-white. When he walked closer, he discovered that the tent was actually sewn with large pieces of snow fox skin. The top was snow-white without a trace of impurities. It looked like the peak of a 1,000-year snow mountain. From a distance, it contained a kind of cold and strange beauty. There were no guards outside the tent. The gray-clothed man paused at the entrance before walking in. There was a purple crystal curtain hanging in the middle of the tent. The top-quality crystals were sparkling and translucent. They flickered with a bright snow-white brilliance, almost dazzling the eyes of those who looked at them. The candlelight in the tent, under the reflection of the sparkling stones, was even more beautiful. Once one stepped in, it was as if they had walked into a magnificent paradise. Behind the curtain, a figure could faintly be seen. It seemed to be dressed in a beautiful red robe. It sat upright in front of the 7-stringed zither, not strumming it. The gray-clothed man walked in front of the curtain and slowly bowed. His actions revealed a kind of extreme respect. "Saintess," the gray-clothed man said. "How did it go?" After a while, a sweet and charming female voice came from behind the curtain. This voice was very pleasant to listen to, like the first drop of blood that had melted into a 10,000-year-old glacier the moment the spring sun shone in. It carried with it 1,000 years of laziness and charm, and also a kind of naivety that did not understand the affairs of the world. Just listening to it made one feel as if they were about to drown in it. It made one almost unable to resist the urge to lift the sparkling curtain and see how beautiful the person inside was. "Yuan Chuan is incompetent. Please punish me, Saintess," the gray-clothed man said. In front of this woman, the gray-clothed man lowered his noble chin, as if he was a devout believer, prostrating at the feet of his faith. "Loyal and humble," he said. He still did not say who the owner of that letter was. "It's fine." The person behind the curtain said lazily, almost like a beauty who had just woken up from a deep slumber and had just stretched, revealing the coquettishness of a cat. If he confessed so easily, he would not be the war god of the great Jin dynasty. Saintess, what should we do now? Or kill Jiang Xing? The gray-clothed man asked. No, I want to keep him alive. The war god of the great Jin dynasty, such an important bargaining chip, is my gift to him. The woman's voice suddenly leapt with a hint of irrepressible joy. Her originally sweet and clear voice was suddenly enshrouded in a layer of sweet mist, making it hard for one to see her true appearance. The gray-clothed man was slightly taken aback. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he did not say anything. He only respectfully lowered his head, humble and obedient as always. When he sees this gift I have given him, he will definitely be very happy. The voice from behind the curtain continued. It was as if the laziness from before had been completely awakened at this moment. It sounded like a child who was ignorant of the ways of the world, innocent and pure, welcoming the person he liked. Yuan Chuan, he is coming. The woman seemed to be smiling. I have waited for him for so long. I can finally see him again, she said. Chapter 172. These two incidents caused the previously tense atmosphere in the capital to be swept away, and it returned to its former state of singing and dancing to celebrate peace. On this day, Lin Zixiang and Wen Fei went to the main entrance of Jinying Wangfu to visit Zhang Yuan. There was still no news from the people sent by the Zhao family. Every time Lin Zixiang thought of this, she felt somewhat annoyed. In her opinion, friends should treat each other with sincerity. Zhao Jin had not told her about such a big thing, so she really did not regard her as a friend. Of course, what made Lin Zixiang even angrier was that Zhao Jin had done such a thing just for a man. After Wen Fei and Lin Zixiang saw Zhang Yuan, Wen Fei wiped the sweat off her forehead and said, Yuan Mimi, it seems that the servants of Jinying Wangfu are sincerely obedient to you. If the servants in my fu were half as sensible as this, I would thank the heavens and thank the earth. Jiang Yuan smiled and said, speaking of which, I have not entered the palace during this time, Inger Jijia. The servant girl was not to be outdone and said, Miss, this was bestowed to this servant by old Furin. If Miss needs it, you can ask old Furin for it. This servant does not dare to casually give old Furin's things to others. Moreover, Miss is of noble birth and jade leaves. What kind of good things do you not have? Why lower yourself to this servant's level? Xia Tianyi had already resigned from his official position and spent every day outside indulging in debauchery. He was no longer the calm and reserved person he once was. Perhaps he felt that his own younger brother personally putting on a green hat for him was a huge blow. In short, he was now in a state of depression and was like mud. Naturally, it is a good thing, Jiang Chao said unhurriedly, and it is an extremely good thing. However, such a precious thing could not be appreciated by ordinary people. This was also the reason why Lin Zixiang had yet to marry. Speaking of which, Lin Zixiang's appearance could be considered beautiful and her family background was not bad. However, her vision was too arrogant. When matchmakers came knocking on her door to propose marriage, she felt that it was not worth mentioning. Out of respect for her, Chief Lin rejected those matchmakers. Over time, the reputation of the daughter of the Lin family being very picky spread, and gradually, no one proposed marriage. Lin Zixiang was now 18 years old, which made her an old lady in the great Jin dynasty. There were many people talking about her, but the Lin family was completely unaware. She's very smart. She has plenty of ways to discipline her subordinates. You won't be able to learn them. Lin Zixiang interrupted her without hesitation. She was as straightforward as ever, moreover, she is beautiful and Jinying Wang protects her. You only know how to practice martial arts every day. How can your husband protect you? Wen Fei was also married now, and she was married to a military family with a similar social status. However, a new daughter-in-law would always encounter some difficulties after marrying into the family. Wen Fei was used to being careless, so she was somewhat unable to control her servants. As soon as she saw the order of Jinying Wanfu and the respect they had for Jiang Wan, she naturally became envious. This person was Jiang Chao. Xia Jun also smiled and sat opposite Jiang Chao. He poured a small cup of wine and brought it to his lips. After sniffing it, he said, "This wine is good wine. Cousin knows how to enjoy himself. I am ashamed of my inferiority." The few of them chatted for a while. When the sky gradually turned dark in the afternoon, Lin Zixiang and Dong Yinger stood up to take their leave. Just as they were about to step out of the door, Wen Fei Fei suddenly felt a little dizzy. She staggered and was about to fall. Lin Zixiang was just about to enter the carriage when she jumped in fright. Before she could move, she saw a green silhouette flash past her side and help Wen Fei Fei up. As soon as these words were spoken, Lin Zixiang and Wen Fei Fei's expressions changed at the same time. After a long while, Lin Zixiang said, "You're quite insightful. If you had the opportunity to enter the palace to participate in the consort selection, the position of empress would definitely belong to you." Lin Zixiang did not say the last sentence, but she believed that Jiang Yuan knew what she wanted to say. This was a very insulting action, one that people would only do to beggars. However, when Xia Jiaojiao saw this, not only did she not get angry, she immediately smiled like a flower. She bent down to pick up the silver fragments and said, "Many thanks, second younger brother. Not fighting for favor, but I don't know why she entered the palace." Lin Zixiang also replied with a cold face, "She's more and more similar to those women in the palace. I can't see any difference." The courtyard was in an uproar. When the maidservant raised her eyes and saw Xia Jun standing not far away, she immediately called out, "This servant greets second young master." She scolded everyone, but the last person to disappear was Zhao Jin. Zhao Jin's disappearance had happened a few months ago, but at that time, Zhao Furen and Lord Zhao had hidden it from everyone. Later on, perhaps because they had mobilized the Imperial Guards, they really couldn't find her. They had no choice but to find Zhao Jin's handkerchiefs to inquire about the news. Only then did they know that such a thing had happened. In the last letter that Zhao Jin left behind, she only said that she was going to look for someone and would return after she was done. Yuya took care of Shinro, but she did not live the happy life that she had imagined. Xia Chen's displeasure towards her was all on the surface because of this matter. His actions became more and more unbridled, and he simply didn't spend the night in her courtyard anymore. Xia Cheng and his wife hated her for revealing the scandal. They didn't care about the Xia family's face and treated her very coldly. Yuya's personality also became more and more gloomy. Xia Qing stood there in a daze, eating a mouthful of smoke and dust from the carriage. The surrounding people who were watching the show gradually dispersed, but he was still in a daze. He had lived for so long, and wherever he went, he would receive the respect and praise of others. Even young girls who knew of his reputation would favor him greatly. But now, he didn't know how he had bumped into a thorn, but he was scolded right to his face. Even though this young man had always had a good temper, at this moment, he was still gnashing his teeth in anger. She actually said that he had another hidden illness? How could a young lady say such shocking words? Lin Zixiang believed that other than her father, all the men in the world were the same. They were arrogant, their eyes looked up to the sky, and they didn't know what loyalty was. They thought that they were infallible and were truly not worthy of a good woman. That young man was almost pushed down by Lin Zixiang. Immediately, he became so anxious that his face turned red to his ears. The surrounding people, upon seeing this, pointed at him and whispered. He said, "Miss, you've really misunderstood. I am Jin Ling's divine physician, Xia Qing, a doctor. Just now, I just wanted to see what happened to this Furen." In the Xia Ho Fu, Xia Jun dusted off his sleeves and walked out of the Yuanzi. As he walked out of the courtyard, he saw Xia Jiaojiao fighting over something from the hands of a servant girl. She loudly said, "You're just a lowly servant girl, what do you need such a good bracelet for? Give it to me." After Xia Jun left the Fu, he walked to a small tavern on the street and walked in. The tavern manager seemed to be very familiar with him as he welcomed him into a small room. At this moment, there was a person sitting inside. That person was dressed in blue and was sitting in front of the window, pouring himself a cup of tea and drinking by himself. The manager withdrew and that person turned around, saw Xia Jun, and smiled slightly. "Dowdy." Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. "Naturally, it's not so easy to stay in the palace. If you're still as simple and carefree as before, you won't be able to live for long." Xia Jun looked coldly at Xia Zhaojiao. Ever since the matter between Shenrou and Xia Tian was exposed, the Xia family had become the laughingstock of the entire capital. Unfortunately, Shenrou's paternal family could not be easily severed. Although no one would die, Shenrou's status in the Xia family had plummeted. Xia Zhaojiao had become a disgrace left behind by the adultery of the Xia family's younger brother-in-law and sister-in-law. Xia Furan had once called Xia Zhaojiao to the ancestral hall and wanted to force her to drink a cup of poisoned wine to end the matter. Who knew that halfway through, Xia Tian had received news from an unknown source and saved Xia Zhaojiao from Xia Furan's hands? Exactly. When Fei Fei was afraid that Lin Zixiang would lecture her again and immediately echoed Jiang Ruan's words, "You're already married, what's the use of saying these things now? Although my life is not as good as Ruan Mimi's, it's still much more carefree than when I was a young lady. At least, I don't have to face a bunch of jealous sisters at home." Hearing this, Xia Zhaojiao became even more anxious and angry. "You still dare to threaten me?" Jiang Ruan smiled slightly and declined to comment. If one were to say that Lin Zixiang's temperament was really an oddity among the noble ladies. She was a straightforward person and did not understand the ways of the world. When others looked at her, they could not tell whether she was stupid or smart, but she was truly a transparent person. Her upright personality was exactly the same as that of Official Lin. Everyone said that Official Lin was a civil official brimming with talent, but how could he have raised such a shocking daughter who did not follow the 3 cardinal principles and 5 virtues? However, Jiang Ruan felt that Official Lin was the one who was truly wise. The daughter that he had raised was much more precious than those noble young ladies in the capital. Lin Zixiang looked at Jiang Ruan and then looked at Wen Fei Fei before she said, "Indeed, getting married is not a good thing. One's original temperament has returned to its original nature, but now, she is indulging in worldly affairs all day long. One was originally cunning, and now, her thoughts are even more tactful. The other has entered the palace, and even her temperament has changed. She is unusually cold all day long." There is also one. A trace of annoyance flashed in Lin Zixiang's eyes. "She simply disappeared, and I don't know what she has gone to do." Lin Zixiang sized him up. This man could be considered delicate and pretty, and he was dressed in plain cotton clothing with a cloth bag at his waist. His appearance was not bad. At this moment, his face was red, and it was unknown whether it was from anger or embarrassment, but his tone was full of sincerity. But was he a divine physician of Jinling? Anyone who claimed to be a divine physician in the field of medicine was an old man with a white beard. When it came to being a doctor, one had to have experience. The older one was, the richer one's experience would be. This man looked to be at most in his early 20s, so how could he be called a divine physician? He was more like an apprentice in the medical hall. In this lifetime, Lin Zixiang hated people who were pretentious and self-righteous. Immediately, her face turned cold as she said, "With your small physique, a gentle push from a woman like me would cause you to fall. I do not know if your body has some hidden illness. What divine physician of Jinling? You can't even cure your own hidden illness. I think you are nothing more than a scoundrel who deceives the world." Finishing, she could not bear to look at the other party any longer, and helped Wen Fei Fei up the carriage and left. It was a young man dressed in a green long gown. After helping Wen Fei Fei up, he was not in a hurry to let go, but instead firmly held onto her hand. Seeing this, Lin Zixiang immediately flew into a rage and said, "Where did this lecture come from? Quickly let go of your hand. That's not it." Jiang Chao lightly said, "There is something more delightful than a promotion. That is, cousin, our common enemy. Now that there is a chance, we can eliminate him. Let go of your hand. When Lin Zixiang saw that he still didn't let go, she immediately pushed him away and supported Wen Fei Fei. Wen Fei Fei was still in a daze and didn't know what had happened. She could only say, "Ah Xiang, I'm fine." Wen Fei Fei then raised her head to look at the sky and pretended not to hear Lin Zixiang's words. On the other side, when the Shirong people found out that Zhao Guang had led the Zhao family army over, they retreated back to the border and temporarily obtained peace. The servant girl's sharp tongue had obviously angered Xia Jiao Jiao, who immediately gave her a slap. "How dare you talk back? Who is the master?" Zhao Furan's heart was burning with anxiety. Hearing from Zhao Jin's servant girl, Zhao Jin had been acting strangely for the past few days. She did not know why, but she seemed to be in a daze every day. However, it was not sadness. Zhao Furan had also experienced it before. She immediately thought that Zhao Jin had a sweetheart, and this time, it was very likely that she had gone to find her sweetheart. On one hand, she scolded which family had abducted her daughter, and on the other hand, she scolded Zhao Jin for being shameless and daring to do such a foolish thing. It must be known that she was betrothed as a wife and ran away as a concubine. If Zhao Jin ran away with someone, she would not be able to raise her head for the rest of her life. After Dong Yinger entered the palace, because of her relationship with the capital governor, she was not completely neglected. She was fortunate enough to be promoted to the position of Baolin. Her temperament was soft and gentle, and she also learned how to survive in the ruthless palace. However, in the end, she had a lack of interest, as if she was not interested in anything. Xia Jiao Jiao was originally afraid of this second younger brother. Now that her status was not the same as before, she was even more afraid of Xia Jun. She also acted lowly towards him. Xia Jun smiled and leisurely walked past her. When he passed by Xia Jiao Jiao, he shook his sleeve and threw out a piece of silver. Young divine Dr. Xia was still immersed in his shocked emotions. He threw the matter that he had just wanted to tell Lin Zixiang to the back of his mind. He shook his head and looked at the main door of Jinying Wang Fu in front of him. Immediately, he felt an incomparable resentment. If Xiao Xiao had not wanted him to stay in the capital and become Jiang Ruan's personal physician, he would not have been criticized in front of so many people. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Xia Qing flicked his sleeves and turned to leave. She seems to be a different person now. When Fei Fei's eyes were somewhat hurt. A few days ago, I went to the palace to see her and brought her a little plaything. Although she was smiling, she seemed to be very distant. In short, now I feel that I do not understand her. Housekeeper Lin was naturally happy again. When the old Jinying Wang couple was still alive, Jinying Wang Fei had a kind temperament and was also on good terms with many of the madams of the official families. Naturally, there was no end to the number of people who came to visit. Every day, there would be carriages from different families parked in front of the Fu. It was very lively, but it was also a manifestation of the master's family's social relations. After the old Jinying Wang couple passed away, Xiao Xiao happened to have a cold temperament. Other than a few servant girls, there were probably no other females who set foot in Jinying Wang Fu. After many years of silence, Jiang Ruan, who looked indifferent on the outside, was actually quite popular. Not long after she moved in, there were already good friends who came to visit. When Fei Fei and Lin Zixiang could be considered the more famous young ladies of the official families in the capital. Naturally, housekeeper Lin ordered the whole Fu to properly entertain them. Oh? Xia Jun seemed to be interested. What? Biao Gu is working under 8th Highness. Has he been promoted again? Hearing Xia Jun's name, Xia Jiaojiao was startled and immediately stopped what she was doing. Seeing Xia Jun standing not too far away, a trace of fear flashed through her eyes and she whispered, "Second younger brother." The servant girl twisted her body to avoid Xia Jiaojiao's slap and said, "Miss, please don't make things difficult for this servant. If old Furan's mama sees this, it would not be good to implicate Miss and punish her." Lin Zixiang then turned to Jiang Wan and said, "Originally, I thought that this marriage had disregarded your wishes and was afraid that you would be wronged. Now, it seems that you are also willing to endure hardship. In short, Jining Wang is not in the Fu, so you can live comfortably by yourself and avoid any awkwardness." Among these people, the one who lived the most comfortably every day was actually Xia Jun. At that time, Xia Jun had lost the opportunity to become an official because of the incident at the ancestral hall. At that time, he had been very depressed for a period of time. Now, it seemed that it was just a so-so. Every day, he coldly watched the absurd chaos in the Xia Fu, as if he was an outsider. Lin Zixiang thought about it and sighed, "You don't even care about these things, why should I worry about them?" As the days passed, good news came from the people far away at the border. After the brocade guards led by Xiao Xiao arrived at Heiguan Cliff, they redeployed their troops and changed their battle formation to resist the siege of Tianjin. In war, the most important thing was to win in one go. Previously, Tianjin had pursued and attacked, but now that their reinforcements had arrived, they had suffered a great loss. For a while, they did not continue to attack and the two armies were in a stalemate. For the soldiers of the Great Jin dynasty, this was a good opportunity to gain some time to rest and reorganize. It's just a matter of words, and it can't be put on the table. In the future, if there's a chance, you will naturally enjoy endless good wine, much better than this. Lin Zixiang's voice was very loud, and immediately, the surrounding people's gazes turned to look at her. The man was also startled by Lin Zixiang's sudden question. When he saw the gazes of the people around him, he immediately blushed and said, "Miss, you misunderstand, this humble one is only." Hearing this, Xia Jun drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. "Cousin, what good news do you have for me?" Unfortunately, although Xia Jiao's life was saved, she could no longer return to the days when she had an outstanding status in the Xia family. Wherever she went, she was a disgrace to the Xia family, and people would talk about the Xia family's scandals. Xia Cheng confined her to her room and did not allow her to take a step out of the Fu. Her reputation had already become like this, so naturally, no one was willing to marry her. Not only that, Shenrou could not protect her, Xia Tianyi loathed her, and Xia Cheng and his wife became cold towards her. Xia Jiao's life in the Fu was very difficult, and she did not even seem like a young miss. Because of this, she was reduced to the point of fighting over jewelry with a servant girl. Jiang Wan looked at her indignant expression and smiled as she shook her head. "It's useless for you to be anxious now. It's better to wait and see. As for the rest, we are ordinary people, and we are just struggling to get by every day. Marrying is nothing more than submitting to reality. It's just that after marrying, it's not bad to try your best to live a better life." She smiled. "Just like you said, I'm living well. I'm even more at ease than in the minister's Fu." Chapter 173. Xia Jun's expression darkened and a trace of emotion flashed across his eyes. This emotion was fleeting, but after a moment, he smiled faintly and said, "Cousin, what do you mean by this?" "Cousin and I have half of the Xia family's blood flowing in our veins, so we must treat each other with sincerity. There's no need to speak in riddles. Beauty, now that you've fallen to such a state, unable to become an official and can only secretly work for His 8th Highness, unable to obtain the official position and glory that you deserve, who gave you all of this?" Jiang Chao laughed. "You and I both know the answer." Xia Jun smiled as he looked at Jiang Chao. He was different from Jiang Chao. Although Jiang Chao had been working under Xianli and now seemed to be rising in his official career, at best, Xia Yan had protected him too well at that time, and his brain was not enough. Moreover, Jiang Chao had inherited Jiang Quan's cowardly and wavering character, and often thought himself clever. For example, Xia Jun clearly knew that Jiang Chao was deliberately saying these words for him to hear, but he did not bat an eyelid. "Working for 8th Prince is my glory, I dare not complain. As for cousin's promotion, it is cousin's luck. My luck is not good, so I can't blame others," Xia Jun said. Hearing this, Jiang Chao looked deeply at Xia Jun. Xia Jun was an unfathomable person. At that time, it was the imperial edict that forbade him from entering officialdom, but Xia Jun unexpectedly became Xian Li's advisor. Jiang Chao had already figured out some of Xian Li's habits, and he never used people without ability. Xia Jun's identity was special, but to be able to make Xian Li look at him in a new light, he certainly had great ability. Jiang Chao was a narrow-minded person. Although he had many taboos against Xia Jun, now that the situation was different, he could only conspire with Xia Jun. To tell the truth, cousin, this time it is 8th Prince's intention. Knowing that he would not be able to gain any advantage if he continued to beat around the bush, Jiang Chao simply made things clear. He said, 8th Prince ordered me to do this, but I feel that this matter can be improved, but I need cousin's help. Xia Jun slowly reached out and poured himself a cup of wine. The wine rippled slightly, emitting an alluring mellow fragrance. Xia Jun raised the wine cup, but was not in a hurry to drink it. Instead, he slightly narrowed his eyes, as if smelling the wine. Slowly, he said, "Oh? So, cousin, what good will it do me if I do this? How far can this matter go?" He was not in a hurry to ask what it was, nor did he ask how to do it. The first thing he asked was the result. This showed that Xia Jun was a person who did not care about using any means. No matter what it was, he only wanted a satisfactory result. Jiang Chao lowered his voice, but a trace of coldness flashed across his face. "What's the result?" "It all depends on how big cousin's chips are." "How about the entire Xia family?" Xia Jun smiled. Jiang Chao was stunned. He carefully looked at the person in front of him. Xia Jun's face was handsome, but his eyes were a little gloomy. His eyes suddenly emitted a hint of light, like a hungry wolf on the brink of death in the wilderness who suddenly discovered a prey. There was a kind of crazy excitement. Jiang Chao forcefully suppressed the shock in his heart, thinking that his cousin was indeed a madman. However, on the surface, he said solemnly, "Then, I promise cousin that after this matter is over, there will no longer be a General Fu, nor will there be any embroidered uniform guard, and even more so, there will be no Jiang Yuan and her sister." He said, "At that time, Hong and Junzhu will naturally be personally delivered to cousin's hands. Whatever cousin wants to do, you can do it." This chip. It was indeed very tempting. A pair of slightly raised charming eyes appeared in front of Xia Jun's eyes. When that pair of charming eyes was not looking at people, it was as if they were separated by a thin layer of mist, cold and calm. When they were looking at people, there was a hint of ridicule, as if ridiculing the other party's ignorance and childishness. In this life, the first half of his life had been extravagant. He had the wind and the rain, and as long as he wanted something, there was nothing he could not obtain. However, this balance had been broken by Jiang Yuan. She had only used a small trick, and it had completely destroyed his beautiful and splendid life. He did not have much of an obsession with being an official, but Jiang Yuan had challenged his dignity. In his opinion, if he had taken a fancy to Jiang Yuan, she should have obediently obeyed. Who would have known that she was not an obedient house cat, but a terrifying female leopard? She had only slightly flashed her claws, but she had already let people have a taste of her fierceness. However, no matter how fierce a leopard was, it was still just prey. All these years, he had seen Jiang Yuan change from an unfavored daughter who had been raised in a rural residence to the eldest daughter whom everyone in the Jiangfu feared. From an official's daughter to a Junzhu whom the Empress Dowager relied on. He had seen her defeat Jiang Li and Jiang Su, defeat Xia Yan, and even Xia Jiao Jiao's matter. He had never seen such a woman, but because of this, he had become interested in her. Such a woman, scheming, strong and tenacious, with a beautiful appearance and a rotten heart, really suited his appetite. But, she dared to reject him, so she had to pay the price. Jiang Chao's proposal was really too tempting. A trace of a sigh flashed in his eyes. If Jiang Yuan was willing to obediently attach herself to him, that would certainly be good. Unfortunately, he knew what kind of person Jiang Yuan was. Jiang Ruan would not lower her noble head like anyone else, so he could only chop off that beautiful head. He said, Biao Ji's proposal is indeed very interesting. Jiang Chao stared at him closely, and slowly, he heard Xia Jun's remaining words, we can try. Jiang Chao then heaved a sigh of relief. Xia Jun looked at his wine cup indifferently and said, I wonder what Biao Gu intends to do. Capturing the brocade guard and the General Fu in one fell swoop was certainly not an ordinary matter. Now that the Zhao family and the brocade guard were far away at the border, it was inevitable that they would act on the battlefield. A treacherous smile suddenly appeared on Jiang Chao's face. Before the troops and horses move, the provisions and fodder move first. Even if the brocade guard and the Zhao family army have enormous abilities, they will not be able to withstand running out of ammunition and provisions. For the time being, not mentioning the war in Shirong, the brocade guard repeatedly sent back news of victory. The morale of the brocade guard greatly increased, and they recovered several lost territories. Guan Lianghan's injuries also gradually stabilized, and the morale of the soldiers of the Great Jin dynasty gradually stabilized. On the contrary, the state of Tianjin changed from its previous valiant and fierce appearance. Even the best weapons and tactics could not save them from defeat. Everyone was surprised to discover that this Jinying Wang, Xiao Xiao, who was known as a rebel and traitor in the Great Jin dynasty, could actually command good tactics. His military strategy was different from that of Guan Lianghan and Jiang Xing. It was a completely different style of conduct, cold, cruel, and absolutely like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. The brocade guard that he had brought with him were almost like indestructible iron men. Their valiance was like that of a lone wolf on the grasslands. No, they could not even compare to a lone wolf on the grasslands. 1 against 10, they were unstoppable. In front of such a troop, the soldiers of Tianjin were terror-stricken, and they retreated step by step in defeat. Xiao Xiao used a method that was not war to achieve victory. Ever since his arrival, the war with the state of Tianjin was no longer like a war, but more like a one-sided massacre. Even so, the war between the state of Tianjin and the Great Jin dynasty could not be settled overnight. At that time, in order to speed up the journey, the army had to travel as lightly as possible, and their rations were also brought according to the rules of close combat. The place where they fought with the state of Tianjin was located in a desolate desert, and there were no herdsmen or cattle or sheep in the vicinity, so there was a real shortage of rations. And the method of using war to sustain war was only suitable for predatory warfare. Now, it was too late, and it was not allowed. According to the rules of the Great Jin dynasty, the rations were gathered and transported by the courier station in the capital, and transported by the leader of the military supply troops, Sir Zhang. Zhang Ji had been the leader of the military supply troops for many years, and his travel expenses were the shortest. This was because the rations brought by the previous war had almost been consumed, and now the state treasury could not allocate too much extra rations. What was collected now was the rations collected from the common people everywhere. In a short period of time, this batch of rations would be quickly transported to the border of the state of Tianjin. This was the few remaining reserves of the Great Jin dynasty. Xiao Xiao had to win the war before these rations were consumed, otherwise, he would only be defeated due to the exhaustion of rations. In Jinying Wangfu, Jiang Ruan put down the book in her hands and looked at the young man in purple in front of her. He was sitting opposite Jiang Ruan, looking at her with a smile, and slowly waving the folding fan in his hand. If one were to ignore the mustache on his face that did not match his age, he would be an extremely handsome and elegant young master. Unfortunately, because of that mustache, this supposedly elegant and unrestrained action seemed somewhat comical. Qi Feng lived in a large courtyard separated from Jinying Wangfu, which was also arranged by Xiao Xiao for him. He and Xia Qing lived together. If it were not for the fact that Jiang Ruan was in Jinying Wangfu, Xiao Xiao would have directly let these two people live in Jinying Wangfu. Now, although Qi Feng and Xia Qing did not live in Jinying Wangfu, they were only separated by a wall, so they were very close. Third sister-in-law, Qi Feng waved his fan and said, "You specially called fourth younger brother over, I wonder what instructions do you have?" Qi Feng put on a very romantic appearance, but a trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. He lived in 100 Zhonglu all year round and had a cold heart towards the imperial court. He usually hid in the dark and was not clear about the affairs of the great Jin court's inner courtyard. Therefore, he was not very clear about Jiang Ruan. On the way to the capital this time, he learned some things about Jiang Ruan's past and present from others. Regarding Jiang Ruan's evaluation, Guanliang Han was resourceful and Imo Tsong was vicious and merciless. As for Xiao Xiao to be so protective, he was certainly not an ordinary person. Qi Feng did not underestimate Jiang Ruan, but he felt that no matter how smart she was still a woman. Women were always somewhat whimsical and sentimental. However, from the time he came to the capital and met Jiang Ruan until now, Jiang Ruan had not revealed a trace of longing for Xiao Xiao. Qi Feng felt that it was interesting. It seemed that the falling flowers yearn for love, but the heartless brook still flows. Xiao Xiao had now kicked an iron plate. Jiang Ruan looked at the young man in front of her and slowly revealed a smile. What kind of person was Qi Si? She had not come into contact with him. However, since Xiao Xiao said that Qi Si was a person who learned the power of the imperial court, there were some things that could not be better for him to come forward. She slowly said, "Today, I looked for young Master Qi to ask young Master Qi to save my life." Save my life? Qi Feng looked at Jiang Ruan and found that her expression did not seem to be joking. He thought for a moment, but did not rashly answer, "Third sister-in-law, I am not a doctor. If you want to save a life, you should look for Xia Wu." He had not yet figured out Jiang Ruan's temperament. Unlike Xiao Xiao believed in Jiang Ruan because he liked her, but Qi Feng and Jiang Ruan did not have a deep friendship. He was always somewhat wary of Jiang Ruan. If Jiang Ruan wanted to take advantage of Xiao Xiao's absence and do something that would harm Xiao Xiao and Jinying Wang Fu, Qi Feng would not stand idly by. Even if he risked his life, he would still stop her. If it was one person's life, young Master Xia can indeed save it, but now it is the lives of tens of thousands of people. How can young Master Xia save them all? Jiang Ruan said lightly. Qi Feng slowly frowned, and the playful expression on his face completely disappeared. He said, "What does third sister-in-law mean? Fourth brother really does not understand. Young Master Qi is a smart person, why do you need to talk to me in a roundabout way?" Jiang Ruan's words were not polite, and could even be said to be somewhat direct. Since young Master Qi and Xiao Xiao are from the same sect, they naturally have a deep friendship. Now that someone wants to plot against Xiao Xiao, I think that with young Master Qi's friendship with Xiao Xiao, you will definitely not stand idly by. It is reasonable for you to help him, right? Something happened to third Master Xiao. There was some disbelief in Qi Feng's eyes. These days, he did not receive any news that something had happened to Xiao Xiao of Jini Wei. Jiang Ruan's words were indeed very suspicious. If something had happened to Xiao Xiao, he would be the first to know. He is not in trouble now, but if this goes on, something will happen soon. Jiang Ruan's voice was heavy. She looked directly at Qi Feng, and a trace of ridicule suddenly jumped into her beautiful eyes. The ridicule disappeared in a flash, and the dark light disappeared, turning into bright eyes that were as bright as colored glass, full of amorous feelings as she looked around. She said, "I think that before young Master Qi came, you must have heard about my matter. I have enmity with Jiang Chao and the Xiahou Fu. I made Jiang Chao lose a finger, and also made Xia Jun unable to enter the officialdom." Qi Feng originally wanted to take advantage of the situation to smile, but found that it was somewhat inappropriate to make this expression at this moment. He did indeed collect information about Jiang Ruan before coming. However, he did not know the significance of Jiang Ruan talking about these things now. After a pause, he said, "What about it? What does it have to do with third brother? Could it be that they will do something rebellious in order to take revenge?" "No," Jiang Ruan stared at Qi Feng. Qi Feng was shocked by her stare, only to hear Jiang Ruan continue to say, "What I want to say is that Jiang Chao and the Xia family's hatred for me is only on the surface. Jiang Chao and the Xia family are working for the 8th Prince Xianli, and Xiao Xiao has become a thorn in Xianli's side. Xiao Xiao is unwilling to cooperate with Xianli. For such a person who is unwilling to cooperate and whose power is beyond his control, Xianli only has one choice, and that is to kill. When Jiang Yuan talked about these secrets, she always behaved very calmly, as if she was not talking about the important matter of fighting for the throne, but discussing how good the weather was today. Qi Feng's expression was somewhat stiff. He heard Jiang Ruan's cold and calm voice coming from the opposite side, so, on the surface, it seems that Jiang Chao and the Xia family want to deal with me, but in fact, it is Xianli who wants to deal with Xiao Xiao, or rather, it is Xianli who wants to deal with the genie guards. Do you understand what I am saying? You. Jiang Ruan's words were too straightforward, so straightforward that Qi Feng did not know how to respond. He suddenly had a feeling that Jiang Ruan was indeed very suitable for Xiao Xiao. On the surface, Jiang Ruan was incomparably calm, a person who defended what was established, but in the dark, there was a hidden force of attack. From her eyes, he saw strength and tenacity. I know Xianli very well. He will make good use of every opportunity, especially at this critical juncture. Now that Xiao Xiao has left the capital, there are only Zhao Yi and a few others left in the General Fu. This is the best opportunity. Xianli will certainly find a way to find something. She looked at the book in front of her. I asked Xiao Xiao to give me a secret guard to monitor Jiang Chao. Jiang Chao met with Xia Jun a few days ago. They formed an alliance? Qi Feng asked. The Xia family is not the same as before, how would they dare to act rashly? The Xia family naturally does not dare, but unfortunately, Xia Jun is a madman. Jiang Yuan smiled coldly. These few days, Zhang Darren of the military supply troops, Zhang Ji, seems to be very diligent. He is also extremely extravagant with his spending. He has even bought 3 large residences and 5 shops in the eastern part of the city. The amount of banknotes in the Bank of the Four Seas has also increased a lot. Young Master Qi, don't you think this is very strange? Zhang Ji. Qi Feng's expression turned cold. He studied the politics of the imperial court and naturally knew the officials of the court very well. Zhang Ji was an old man of the military supply troops. He was upright and full of talent. He had never made a mistake in transporting provisions for so many years. Jiang Ruan's words clearly showed that she was suspicious of Zhang Ji. On one hand, he felt surprised, but on the other hand, he could not believe it. Zhang Ji is a good official. If the water is too clear, there will be no fish. These silver tails may not necessarily be related to Xianli. Military supplies are important matters. Zhang Ji will not destroy his own future. If he knew something had happened, His Majesty would be the first to not spare him. He is indeed a good official. Unfortunately, he has a good-for-nothing son. Jiang Ruan said coldly. His 3 sons are all good young talents. How can you say that they are good for nothing? Qi Feng frowned. Zhang Ji has a doting mistress who gave birth to a son. This son spends all day outside drinking. Zhang Ji's wife is the daughter of Marquis Muyang. She is a powerful person. Zhang Ji does not dare to tell his wife that he has a son outside, but he cannot stop this son from spending money like water. The houses and shops in the east of the city, and even the silver tails, are all prepared for his son. I think Master Qi also knows that Zhang Ji dotes on his son. Qi Feng naturally knew that Zhang Ji was henpecked, but he did not know when Zhang Ji had an illegitimate son outside. Moreover, he did not know where Jiang Yuan knew these things. Zhang Ji loved his 3 sons very much. For a son born from a mistress outside, he felt guilty. Indeed, it was possible that he doted on his son even more. But, Qi Feng said, but the risk is too big. For a little money, he will sacrifice his own future and the life of his whole family. A smart person will not do this. Jiang Yuan smiled slightly. Indeed, it is just for a little money. It is not worthwhile for him to do this. However, what if he can make a meteoric rise because of this? He will no longer have to act according to Marquis Wu Mu, Madame Zhang's maiden family. He can openly welcome that doting mistress's son into the Fu, and can even find a good future for that illegitimate son. Do you think this bargaining chip is big enough? Qi Feng was stunned. Jiang Wan coldly said, who does not want to bet on riches and honor? Moreover, if he wins the bet, the world will change. The Son of Heaven will not be the Son of Heaven, and the court will not be the court. Who will pursue the crime of deceiving the emperor? She slowly said word by word, the crime will only be borne by the loser. However, it is still unknown who will be the winner. I dare to bet on him. Chapter 174. Qi Feng sucked in a breath of cold air. Jiang Ruan's words shocked him, but what was even more shocking was her tone and expression, which had an indescribable ruthlessness and hostility. He suddenly discovered that the word poisonous woman that Imo Tsong said was not enough to describe Jiang Ruan. She was ruthless enough, and more importantly, she was bold enough. Ordinary women would not dare to say such treacherous words, but she had said it, and said it so naturally. The winner was king, and the loser was in the wrong. This was the truth of the court battles, but no one dared to say it clearly. After a long silence, he said, even if he really dares to do so, there are many people in the capital. If there is really a problem with the provisions, before they leave the city, they will be discovered and the matter will be exposed. Naturally, Zhang Ji will not have a good end. The eighth prince is not a fool. How can he let someone take advantage of something that could easily expose the target? Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. Xian Li is the most suspicious person, so he naturally will not use such a clumsy method. Therefore, the passive tampering of the provisions, at least within a few dozen miles of the city, will not have any problems. Moreover, he will definitely put on a show, and this show will be very exciting. The ultimate goal is to gain the trust of His Majesty. You. Qi Feng slightly narrowed his eyes, you seem to know the eighth prince very well. Jiang Ruan's words naturally carried a kind of familiarity with Xian Li, which made Qi Feng's heart flash with a strange feeling. But how could a virtuous girl be familiar with Xian Li? Even if she was a princess in the palace, such an understanding of a person's character, and even understanding of what the other party would do next, could only be grasped by people who were close to her. Qi Feng's heart flashed a guess. Could it be that Jiang Ruan admired Xian Li? Only when she admired someone, would she always pay attention to what he did, what he thought, and understand his every move. But when Qi Feng seriously looked at Jiang Ruan's expression, he secretly shook his head. Jiang Ruan's eyes were calm, and her smile was gentle, but it lacked affection. Looking at her actions and words, it did not seem that she was interested in Xian Li, which made Qi Feng even more confused. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Jiang Ruan saw Qi Feng's puzzled gaze and smiled slightly. Sooner or later, Jinying Wangfu will have to confront the eighth prince. Since it is a state of irreconcilable enmity, it is natural to make early preparations. Otherwise, it would not be good to be treated as a fool and end up dead. Her words were spoken softly, but Qi Feng was startled to hear that she was gnashing her teeth in anger. However, the other party's appearance was beautiful and her eyes were gentle. It was as if everything that had happened just now was an illusion. Even if Xian Li wants to fight for the throne, it will not be so easy. Qi Feng smiled proudly. In this world, there are also people that he does not dare to provoke. Isn't third sister-in-law worrying too much? I guarantee that he doesn't have the guts to attack Jinying Wangfu. Jiang Ruan's smile slowly turned cold. It was true that Qi Feng was well versed in the politics of the imperial court, and he might be able to use it to achieve his own goals. However, Qi Feng also had a weakness, and that was that he was not good at guessing people's minds. From Qi Feng's point of view, he regarded Xian Li as a politician, a fighting prince, and predicted his actions. However, Xian Li's behavior would not be that of a fixed prince. Jiang Ruan viewed Xian Li as a selfish and cunning man who was good at enduring silently. This man would use everything that could be used, including timing. She had been by this man's side for so many years, and her understanding of him was deep to the bone. Qi Feng was not as good as her. So, is young Master Qi willing to help me? Jiang Ruan said lightly. Qi Feng was stunned. He suddenly realized that in the short words that Jiang Ruan had just said, he had already been shaken. Jiang Ruan's words had indeed made him suffer a lot. Unconsciously, he had already agreed with Jiang Ruan's words. He frowned. Third brother and I will prosper together, and we will both suffer together. I am duty-bound to help third brother. Third sister-in-law, he said slowly. We cannot beat the grass and startle the snake in this matter. We might as well let the secret guards continue to monitor Zhang Ji, and then find someone to guard the Xia Fu and Jiang Fu. At least, if we want to stop him, we need to find a foolproof plan. Why should we stop him? Jiang Ruan asked lightly. Qi Feng was startled and looked at her puzzledly. What do you mean? There is a kind of bitterness in this world. It is that one cannot share success with others, and one cannot talk about grievances with others. Since Xia Jun and Jiang Chao want to do this in the dark, I will make them suffer in silence, unable to voice their bitterness. Young Master Qi is used to playing politics in the open, but I feel that sometimes, it is more convenient to do things in the dark. This time, I want them to pay the price. Shocked by the sudden burst of coldness in that pair of beautiful eyes, Qi Feng could not help but be stunned. He felt that when this charming young girl became ruthless, there was a kind of threatening beauty that bloomed in an instant. He had never met such a woman, and could not help but let out a long sigh. So, third sister-in-law, what do you think we should do? Jiang Ruan looked at him with a smile. I know that young Master Qi also has a status in the court. The eighth prince will certainly put on a big show, and young Master Qi will arrange someone to go and call for this show. This way, it will be fun. He even told you this? Qi Feng was startled again, and then smiled bitterly. Forget it, you are the young madam of Jining Wang Fu, there is nothing wrong with telling you. In the future, please take care of me, third sister-in-law. This time, please advise me. Jiang Ruan nodded lightly, and a trace of coldness flashed in her eyes. In the palace. In the imperial garden, the empress was drinking tea and talking with a few beauties. The courtyard was full of orioles and swallows, and all of them were graceful and charming. However, the empress, who was sitting on the main seat, could not hide the old look on her face even though she was dressed in fine clothes. The crown prince was increasingly not favored. Although the emperor did not explicitly order the crown prince to be deposed, the crown prince's participation in the court's affairs was not as good as that of the eighth prince and the fifth prince. This was enough to change the minds of those who were still watching. Originally, there were still some people who were neutral, but now, almost all of them had secretly joined the eighth and fifth factions. As for the crown prince's people, there were not many left. At least everyone in the court knew that the title of the future crown prince of the great Jin dynasty would not fall on the crown prince. Now, it all depended on whether the eighth prince or the fifth prince was more capable. Sitting beside the empress, one was Wang Lian-er, and the other was Jiang Dan. Wang Lian-er was dressed in a pink silk dress that tightened at the waist, making her fair skin look like goat's milk. She was beautiful, but there was a kind of gentleness and elegance in her gestures, as well as a faint scholarly aura. As the daughter of the Hanlin family, she was naturally a talented woman who lived up to her name. Now, she was the emperor's favorite flower. Jiang Dan was dressed in a jade-green dress. In terms of appearance, she was not as beautiful as Wang Lian-er. She did not look as gentle and generous as Wang Lian-er, but she had a fresh and lively feeling. Compared to people like Wang Lian-er, Jiang Dan was quite popular in the palace. Even the empress found it difficult to dislike her. She had a kind of naivety in the way she did things. She treated the servants in the palace well, and she would not take the initiative to fight for favor. Therefore, compared to Wang Lian-er, everyone in the palace liked her. Now, She often followed the emperor and occasionally said something to make the emperor laugh. The emperor also valued her very much. Mushiro did not come today. She had always been arrogant and cold. She never interacted with concubines in the palace. Concubine Xian was even more so. Ever since Imperial concubine Chen and concubine Shu were defeated, she spent her days in the palace pretending to be pure. It was because the battle between the 5th prince and the 8th prince was getting more and more intense that she had to retreat. She could not be arrogant because she was favored. The rest were the new and lower-ranked beauties. Among these beauties, there was no lack of lively and beautiful ones, but among the new beauties, there were only 3 who were favored the most. The empress looked slightly tired and said, "The weather is getting colder." It was indeed getting colder. It was winter, and the wind was stronger every day. Wang Lian smiled and said, "Yes, but it is still warm in the capital. I heard that there are paper-sized snowflakes in the kingdom of Tianjin. It should be the coldest." The empress looked at Wang Lian. Wang Lian's words revealed that the emperor liked her very much. Otherwise, why would he tell Wang Lian about the border? Her expression turned cold and she said, "It is true. The soldiers are suffering in the cold outside. It is really hard." Her Majesty the Empress is right. Jiang Dan smiled. The great Jin dynasty's rivers and mountains need to be guarded by these soldiers. His Majesty's good fortune will last for a long time. Over at Tianjin, we will definitely be able to win a battle. When the soldiers return home, it will certainly be a glorious day. However, every time I think about how the soldiers are working so hard, I feel very ashamed of myself for being so extravagant. I am willing to donate some silver and jewelry in exchange for some rations and supplies to be transported to the border. I will do my part. Hearing Jiang Dan's words, the empress was a little surprised. Then she looked at her with admiration. As the mother of the country, no matter what thoughts the empress had about the court, she always hoped that the great Jin dynasty could continue to prosper. Naturally, she also hoped that the war with the kingdom of Tianjin would be fought beautifully. But everyone knew that this was not an easy task. Now that there was a shortage of rations, it was not easy for Jiang Dan to volunteer to donate some supplies. As a beauty in the palace, Jiang Dan naturally could not donate much. But once this news spread, the beauties in the palace followed suit, and so did the important officials of the court. Together, it would be a considerable amount of supplies. Moreover, Jiang Dan had instinctively mentioned this to the emperor, but she had mentioned it to the empress. This showed that she had no intention of competing for favor. This made the empress feel more at ease. The empress's expression toward Jiang Dan became even gentler. "It is rare that you are so considerate. I will mention this to His Majesty." Her words were obviously praising Jiang Dan. Jiang Dan smiled. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I can do nothing but make a small contribution." The surrounding beauties all looked at Jiang Dan with jealousy and envy. Wang Lian's expression changed slightly. A moment later, it returned to normal and she smiled as if nothing had happened. After the empress ordered the crowd to disperse, Jiang Dan returned to her courtyard. Wan the maidservant beside her, handed her a letter and said softly, "Miss, there is a letter." Jiang Dan returned to her room and asked the palace maids to leave before opening the letter. When she saw the contents of the letter, she was stunned at first. Then, she quickly read through it. After putting down the letter, she thought for a while and suddenly smiled slowly. The supply troops would set off in about 3 days. Because Jiang Dan had volunteered to donate supplies, the beauties in the palace did not want to be outdone and donated their own jewelry. Even the women in the palace were so considerate, so the officials naturally had to follow suit. Everyone in the court more or less contributed a sum of money, which added up to a large sum. Now that the war had consumed a large amount of money from the national treasury, it also consumed a lot of rations. This temporarily alleviated the urgent problem of the shortage of rations. The emperor was very pleased and doted on Jiang Dan even more. Every day, Zhang Ji was busy gathering rations and planning the route. This war with Tianjin could not be underestimated, and everything had to be done without fail. On the third day, when they were supposed to set off, a piece of news came out of the palace. It was that the leader of the supply troops, Zhang Ji, had abused his power and withheld all the rations, reducing them by more than half. This news came out of nowhere, but it shocked everyone in the court. If it was proven that the soldiers' rations had been withheld, not even 10 heads would be enough for Zhang Ji to chop off. However, this was no small matter. The emperor immediately sent someone to stop Zhang Ji and quickly summon him back to the capital. At that time, Zhang Jijing had just left the city with the supply troops and provisions. He did not expect that he would be captured by the imperial guards sent by the emperor on the way. This matter immediately spread throughout the court and almost everyone felt insecure. In a short period of time, the emperor gathered all the court officials to discuss their views on this matter. Xianli straightened his collar, his expression as leisurely as ever, and could even be said to be like a spring breeze. Jiang Chao stood to the side with his head bowed and said respectfully, "Your Highness, everything has been arranged. Enough news has been released to lure people into the trap. Once this matter comes out, not only will it increase His Majesty's trust in Your Highness, it will also suppress His Highness's side. This is just the beginning." Although Xianli was in a good mood, he did not show an expression of arrogance. No matter the time, he maintained a calm and forbearance. "Your Highness is wise," Jiang Chao said. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something and looked at Xianli. "This time, it is all thanks to Beauty Jiang who released the news. It looks like this cooperation was good. In the future, it will be much more convenient with her." The news had been spread by Jiang Dan. There were many women in the imperial harem, and it was easy to spread rumors. In addition, each person had a faction behind them. It looked like a harem, but in reality, it was more complicated and easier to use than the previous court. With a little guidance, the desired effect would be achieved. Jiang Dan was smart, had no one to rely on, and did things cleanly. No one would suspect her. Jiang Chao sighed. This subordinate originally thought that she was timid, but now it seems that this is not entirely the case. "Your Highness is wise and has long predicted that she will cooperate with us." Xianli shook his head. "Do not underestimate women. Women are very cunning. As long as they know how to use their bodies and beauty, they can easily do many things that men cannot. Jiang Dan is not a timid person. Her ambition is higher than the heavens. As for why she is willing to cooperate with us and agreed so readily, on one hand, it is because she understands that she needs to rely on our strength in the palace. On the other hand," Xianli's gaze darkened. "She and Jiang Ruan have a grudge." "A grudge?" Jiang Chao was puzzled. "In the Fu, she has never done anything to Jiang Ruan. At the time, it was Jiang Ruan's mother who raised her. Where did this hatred come from?" Xianli laughed coldly but did not answer. There were some things that Jiang Chao might not know, but he might be able to find out. How exactly did Zhao Mei die? When Xia Yan had first entered the Fu, she had been very careful and had used Jiang Dan's hand. When he had found out about this, Xianli himself had been astonished. After all, Jiang Dan had only been a child at that time, yet she had not hesitated to lay her hands on her own mother. However, from this point, it could be seen that Jiang Dan had been vicious and merciless from a very young age. If such an outstanding chess piece could not be used by him, it would be too much of a pity. He was afraid that Jiang Dan did not have a grudge. If he could make good use of the fact that Jiang Dan had poisoned Zhao Mei, it might be a great help in the future. It was just that he needed to carefully consider where this matter should be put to use. Jiang Chao was bold but not astute. He did not intend to tell Jiang Chao about this beforehand. When Jiang Chao saw the emperor, the crowd of civil and military officials had already been divided into two distinct factions. One faction insisted that Zhang Ji had misappropriated the army's provisions, while the other faction firmly believed that Zhang Ji had been wrongly accused. Everyone knew that Zhang Ji's eldest son, Zhang Ming, had been close friends with Xianli. So when Xianli walked in, everyone's gaze turned to him. Some were filled with righteous indignation, some were taking pleasure in other people's misfortune. But when it came to Xianli, it was only resisted by a gentle expression, as if nothing major in the world could shake his composure. Xianhua watched coldly as Xianli approached, a cold smile on his lips. Coincidentally, a court official was bowing and arguing, "Your Majesty, Zhang Ji considers everyone beneath him." For his own greed, he disregarded the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers, and even threw the great favor of the great Jin court to the back of his mind. This is truly a heinous crime. Minister Wang's words are incorrect. Official Zhang has been in charge of the military supply troops for many years. How could he have made such a mistake? He must have been incited by someone with ulterior motives. This official does not believe it, another official said. Incited? Official Zhang has been an official for so many years. To be incited by someone, it is only because he listened to slanderous rumors. Another voice said with a deeper meaning, "I heard that official Zhang's 3 sons are now growing up." In these words, the spearhead was pointed at Xianli, intentionally or unintentionally. These words were strange. Indeed, Zhang Ji currently did not lack fame or wealth. If someone had really promised him something to make him not hesitate to commit such a grave mistake, then the promise must have been very generous. Under the heavens, what kind of promise did people yearn for the most? Naturally, it was the promise of the emperor. And the relationship between Zhang Ji's sons and Xianli made people wonder if there was anything fishy going on. The emperor's gaze darkened as he looked at the court officials. It was just a matter of one Zhang Ji. To think that the factions in the court were so clearly divided. He actually did not know that the world now did not regard him, the emperor, as their master. Was it because he was old? If anything happened to him, he would not hesitate. Without waiting for his decree, the world would immediately change its master. Eunuch Li noticed the emperor's expression and sighed in his heart. The competition between the princes was becoming more and more intense. They could not even hide it. But who knew the emperor's thoughts, and that person? AI. Eunuch Li had a trace of doubt in his heart. Why was Zhang Ji's matter so abnormal today? Normally, before the truth came to light, these court officials who saw the wind should sit and watch the situation develop. They should not be in such a hurry to express their stance. They should wait for Zhang Ji's crime to be proven or if he was wrongly accused before they all began to speak. Today was really too strange. Naturally, they did not know that the reason these court officials had expressed their stance so early was because someone had already warned them. Everyone thought that the information they received was accurate. Now, they were arguing with reason because they were certain that the side they stood on would definitely be good. A trace of pride flashed across Xianhua's face. Xianli saw it and only found it funny. Xianhua was too impatient. All these years, Xianhua had relied on Consort Xian's guidance to safely stay in the palace and even reach his current position. His impatient personality had not changed at all. If it was in the past, this would definitely cause the emperor to feel suspicious. But since ancient times, emperors were often suspicious. The more the situation looked to be unfavorable to Xianli, the more the emperor would trust Xianli. Naturally, if something really happened to Zhang Ji, the first person to suspect who had ordered him to seduce him would naturally be Xianli. The more Xianli was at a disadvantage, the more people condemned him, and the more hesitant the emperor would be. Because Xianli looked too isolated and helpless. People always sympathized with the weak, and the emperor was the same. This was human nature. But a trace of doubt flashed across Xianli's eyes. Was today's matter too smooth? It was so smooth that he had a strange feeling in his heart, as if it should not be like this. When he had Jiang Dan release the news, it had only been a fixed number of people. But the people who spoke today were not in the plan. It was true that these people had pushed his plan forward and even made it smoother. But it was too smooth, and it made people suspicious. Lao Ba, what do you think of this matter? The emperor finally asked. The gaze he looked at Xianli was like a sharp sword, as if Xianli said one wrong word, there would immediately be blood splattered on the spot. Justice is in the hearts of the people, Xianli said lightly. I believe that Father has already made a decision. I believe in Father, and I also believe in Father's officials. We only need to wait for the person who reported to present the results of the investigation, and we will know. He had already expressed his position with these words. He believed that Zhang Ji was innocent, but he had used the words officials who believed in the emperor, and this was already very polite. The emperor's expression gradually eased. Xian Li's actions made people feel more at ease. Xian Hua saw this and the corner of his mouth rose. It was just a struggle before death. Today was the day Xian Li died. At this time, the captain of the soldiers who had been inspecting the army's provisions had already returned to report. He walked in with large strides and knelt down to report, replying to Your Majesty, we have investigated under orders. There is no shortage of provisions for the troops, and everything is in place. Xian Hua's smile froze. He heard Zhang Ji's angry voice from outside, Your Majesty, I have been wronged. Chapter 175. Zhang Ji staggered out from the group of guards. His clothes were crumpled, and his hair was messed up from being pushed around. His face was flushed red, as if he had suffered a great humiliation. As soon as he entered, he knelt down and kowtowed heavily to the emperor several times. Your Majesty, this old subject has been wronged. Zhang Ji had been an official in the court for many years and could be considered to have some weight. It was rare for him to be in such a sorry state. Even the emperor could not easily scold or beat him, otherwise, it would chill the hearts of the court officials. He said, My beloved subject, please rise. Zhang Ji raised his head but was not in a hurry to stand. He only raised his head with an angry gaze, as if he would faint in the next second. After a pause, he said, This old subject has never done anything shameful in his life. Now, someone insists on splashing dirty water on this old subject and tarnishing this old subject's reputation. This person's intentions are extremely sinister. Your Majesty, please give this old subject justice. The emperor let out a long sigh and his gaze suddenly turned to Xian Hua. Xian Hua's mouth was slightly open, as if he had not recovered from this sudden turn of events. Suddenly aware of the emperor's gaze, he raised his head and was instantly chilled by the coldness in the emperor's eyes. He stood where he was as if he had fallen into an ice cellar, not daring to move. Zhang Ji had been proven to be innocent. That batch of military provisions had not been reduced at all. Naturally, someone wanted to frame Zhang Ji. Zhang Ji had been an official his entire life and had a considerable amount of weight in the court. Anyone with a bit of brain would not target him. Then, it was time to target the people behind Zhang Ji. If Zhang Ji was framed, the first person to be implicated would be Xian Li. Currently, the person in court who saw Xian Li as a thorn in his side the most was naturally the fifth prince, Xian Hua. The court officials who had just been adding insult to injury did not dare to say a word. The people of Xian Hua's faction were as silent as cicadas in winter. No one understood what had happened. The news they had received was that Zhang Ji would be investigated for stealing military provisions today. But now, Zhang Ji was safe and sound. That news must have been wrong. How could they still dare to run into the blade? The courtiers of Xian Li's faction, on the other hand, all put on airs of watching a good show, unable to conceal the arrogance in their eyes. Xian Li sighed and comforted him gently, Lord Zhang, you don't have to be sad. You've been an official for so many years and your character is fair. Father will definitely help you. Zhang Ji angrily said, if it's just insulting this old official, then it's fine. But this commotion is clearly delaying the advance of the supply train troops. Every day that the army's provisions are not delivered to the frontier, the officers and soldiers will have to endure another day of bitter cold. It's clear that they have bad intentions and want to make things difficult for our great Jin dynasty's soldiers at the border. As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked. Even the emperor, who was sitting on the 9-layered dragon throne, had a cold look in his eyes. Xianhua cried out in his heart. This was supposed to be a turbulent undercurrent between the princes, but with a single sentence from this old man, he brought up the matter of the border war. Everyone knew that the current war between the Great Jin dynasty and the Tian Jin kingdom was the last thing to talk about. Although on the surface, the Great Jin dynasty seemed to be reporting victory after victory because of the arrival of the embroidered uniform guards, but the dangers within were not known to outsiders. This was a knife hanging over the flowery palace of the Great Jin dynasty, and no one was allowed to touch it. But now, Zhang Ji had clearly placed this knife in front of everyone, and had even drawn out the bloodstains on it. Since ancient times, emperors had always been suspicious. What would the emperor think? He would most likely think that he had the intention to bring disaster to the country. If one were to speculate further, there was even the possibility that he had colluded with the enemy. Without sufficient evidence, there was no way to convict him. That news had spread so mysteriously that even Xianhua could not determine the source of the news. The emperor could not find the messenger, so he would certainly be even more bewildered. He would think that Xianhua's ability was so great that even he could not control it. To the emperor, this was not a good sign. My beloved subject, there is indeed something fishy about this matter. Don't worry, we will definitely give you an explanation. The emperor said heavily, the chill in his words causing everyone present to be shocked. No matter how bright the emperor looked on ordinary days, his natural majesty could not be violated. Today, the person behind him had played him like a monkey. If he was really found out, how could he have a good ending? He looked at Zhang Ji, who was kneeling on the ground in tears, and comforted him. We still need you, and the soldiers of the Great Jin dynasty also need you. Today, we have made this trip in vain. We will definitely make that person pay the price. It is just that the situation at the border is tight. My beloved subject will have to make a trip to deal with the future matters. Now that it is late, we will depart tomorrow. My beloved subject, return to your residence today and rest well. We will draft an edict in a while. This was to appease Zhang Ji and seriously investigate this matter. The more Xianhua listened, the worse he felt. But at this moment, if he spoke, it would only add fuel to the fire. He could only silently swallow his resentment, but his expression was unusually unsightly, as if he was about to fling his sleeves and leave. Since the emperor had already put down his arrogance, Zhang Ji had no reason to be pretentious. After repeatedly thanking the emperor for his kindness, the mighty storm over the army's pay slowly subsided. When Zhang Ji returned to his residence, he would naturally receive compensation from the palace. An old official being slandered was indeed a very unpleasant matter. On the surface, it looked like Zhang Ji had been wronged, but in reality, it did not hurt or itch. Instead, it made the emperor trust him even more. In the end, the one who had lost was only Xianhua. At present, the emperor did not blame Xianhua, but his every move today had fallen into the emperor's eyes. He would also think and have his own thoughts. Sometimes, to achieve a certain goal did not require sufficient evidence and certainty. As long as a seed of suspicion was quietly buried in the other person's heart, waiting for it to break through the soil and sprout, there would come a day when this seed would burst forth with incomparably great power. Today's matter was a seed buried in the emperor's heart. The emperor had grown suspicious of Xianhua. From now on, whatever Xianhua did, the emperor might not necessarily have no ulterior motives. From the very beginning, he had lost the initiative. Today's loser was Xianhua, but the biggest winner was Xianli. He did not do anything at all. He did not even appear, but he easily won the emperor's sympathy and trust. It also paved the way for the next step of his plan. When he slowly passed by Xianhua, he smiled slightly. The gloomy gaze he looked at Xianhua seemed to contain a trace of hidden contempt. Xianhua clenched his fists tightly and controlled himself from punching. Behind Xianli, there was a smiling gaze looking at him. This gaze came from the crowd of officials and did not attract much attention. It was a young man wearing a purple official robe. He had a small mustache and a meaningful gaze. When he retracted his gaze, he was surprised to find that there was also a person standing not far from him quietly watching Xianli. That person had not yet grown up and was only a young child. He was born beautiful and delicate. His eyes were as bright as the best glazed stone. However, his gaze was cold and heavy. It was actually somewhat familiar. The child seemed to feel his gaze. He turned his head and stared at him coldly. When he turned around, the young eunuch on the side hurriedly greeted him. 13th Highness, please walk slowly. Qi Feng was slightly stunned. He turned his head and followed the child. Zhang Ji returned to the Fu. As expected, the emperor's imperial edict arrived. He was rewarded with some gold and silver as a consolation. After comforting everyone in the Fu, it was already late at night. Zhang Ji returned to the study and lit an oil lamp. He took out a box from under the study table and handed it to the person standing opposite him. That person had obviously been waiting in the study for a long time. Seeing Zhang Ji's actions, he smiled with satisfaction. Official Zhang is really agile. I will go and report to His Highness. In the future, when His Highness's great undertaking succeeds, Official Zhang will definitely be remembered as the first-class merit. Zhang Ji smiled. Young Master Jiang is too kind. This old man is already half a foot in the ground. How can there be any glory, splendor, or wealth? On the other hand, young Master Jiang is a young hero. In the future, you will soar and become a legendary figure of the great Jin dynasty. The person in the study was none other than Jiang Chao. At this moment, he and Zhang Ji had reached a consensus by flattering each other. However, this alliance had come together because of interests. Sincerity and hypocrisy could be distinguished. Zhang Ji secretly cursed the fellow opposite him for being so vicious. He was even willing to be Xian Li's dog, shamelessly begging for food from Xian Li's hands. Jiang Chao also secretly despised Zhang Ji's nonchalant attitude. Wasn't it all for the sake of power? But no matter what he felt, he always wore a smile on his face. Zhang Ji looked at the small box in Jiang Chao's hands and said with a smile, "This is the key to the warehouse where the army's provisions are kept. There are a total of 800 carriages. Young Master Jiang must do things cleanly to avoid leaving behind any evidence." Naturally, Jiang Chao also smiled. This is an important part of His Highness's great undertaking. How can anything go wrong? Thank you, Lord Zhang, for giving me the key today. I wish Lord Zhang a safe journey tomorrow. Zhang Ji returned his smile. Thank you, young master. After the two had spoken, Jiang Chao left through the back door of the Zhang Fu. It was currently the third watch of the night. The capital was dark and there was not a single star in the sky. Perhaps it was going to rain soon. Even the moon could not be seen. Dark clouds hung heavily in the sky. It was a night where one could not even see their own fingers in front of them. Jiang Chao rode his horse, hurrying all the way until he arrived at the back of a huge warehouse in the eastern part of the city. He saw that the warehouse was built so high that it was impossible to climb. It was at least half the height of the city wall. All the provisions that the army needed to transport were stored inside. The people outside had all arrived. Jiang Chao threw the key to the person standing at the very front. That person took the key and opened the door of the warehouse. As if they had received an order in unison, the people who had been silently waiting around moved in unison. They unloaded the goods from the other side's carriages. One side transported the goods from the warehouse, and the other side transported the goods from the warehouse. This was the act of stealing the beam and replacing the pillar. Jiang Chao looked on complacently until a person walked to his side and said, "Is everything ready?" Jiang Chao turned his head to look. Xia Jun was standing in the deep night, holding only a small torch. His eyes were reflected by the light of the fire, making him look somewhat strange. His expression froze. Everything is ready. Even the people in the surroundings who were in the way have been killed. Xia Jun nodded. He looked at the people going in and out of the huge warehouse, but his face did not reveal much joy. Jiang Chao noticed his expression and asked curiously, "Biaodi, what are you still worried about?" Xia Jun shook his head. A strange look appeared in his eyes. "I don't know why, but I have a feeling of unease." Everything had happened too smoothly. Whether it was the play that Zhang Ji had directed and acted on himself in the throne room, or the current act of stealing the beam and replacing the pillar in the warehouse, everything had happened too naturally and too smoothly. Suddenly, a pair of coquettish eyes appeared in his mind. That eyebrow slightly curved. It looked like a smile, but there was a deep sense of ridicule in his eyes. Xia Jun was startled. He felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over his head. He immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. After a while, he asked Jiang Chao, "Did Jiang Ruan make any unusual movements?" "She stays in Jinying Wangfu all day and has never entered the palace." Jiang Chao smiled coldly. "Biaodi, you don't have to worry too much. She has never left the Fu. How could she know our plans? Could it be that she can predict the future?" Xia Jun's eyes flickered. "Yes, it is impossible for her to predict the future. As a person who lived in a Wangfu, news traveled slower than others. All the sources of information had to be obtained from outside. It was impossible for Jiang Ruan to know what they wanted to do first. Early the next morning, this troop's provisions would be transported along with the military supply troops to the distant border. Moreover, this troop's provisions were not the usual troops' provisions. Everything was done in secret. By the time Jiang Ruan discovered that something was wrong, it would already be too late. For example, how would Jiang Ruan know that they were stealing the beam and replacing the pillar? How could she stop them? It was impossible for her to know of their plans. Unless she was not human, she could predict the future. Xia Jun slowly calmed down and said, "Let's continue, while the sky is not bright." While the sky was not bright, let everything be submerged in the night. And Jiang Ruan was destined to lose in this confrontation. Winner takes all and loser takes all. This was an unchanging principle since ancient times. That night, in Jinying Wangfu, the light in Xiao Xiao's study was not extinguished. From the outside, it looked like a cluster of bright and warm fireworks in the pitch-black night. It was as if one could open the door and see a cold and reserved youth dressed in black sitting in front of the desk. At this moment, there was indeed a person sitting in front of the desk, but it was a graceful young girl who had just matured. The fragrance of tea curled up in spirals and the rising mist separated the desk. Under the illumination of the lamp, a small beautiful flower bloomed. What was even more beautiful than the misty flower was the young girl's appearance. She was clearly wearing a moon-white long skirt with a dark purple cloak draped over her head. This made her face look as if it was carved out of fine white jade. Every stroke of her facial features seemed to have been carefully carved by the heavens. Every place was just right and beautiful. She exuded a kind of peerless charm from her bones. Every movement of this beauty was amorous, but her pair of charming eyes were cold and elegant, forcefully suppressing that kind of vulgar charm. She was like a mandala that bloomed under the moonlight, cold and enchanting. Jiang Ruan looked at the young man in purple in front of her. Even though Qi Feng had been obsessed with the politics of the court all his life, he could not help but be slightly absent-minded by this peerless beauty. There were beauties in the world, and it was rare for them to be beautiful and intelligent. If one's appearance was said to be a bag of skin, then this young girl's wisdom was to inject a vivid soul into this beautiful bag of skin, making it lively and fragrant. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. Today in the palace hall, it was all thanks to young Master Qi. Xianli and Zhang Ji had joined forces to sing this play, and from beginning to end, she had never thought of stopping them. Since Qi Feng was playing with the politics of the court, he naturally had another identity in the court. This identity looked unremarkable, neither too high nor too low, but it was the most subtle existence. If he wanted to do something in the court, it was the easiest way to hide his identity and not be detected. And Qi Feng also acted according to Jiang Ruan's instructions. In Zhang Ji's play, he pushed the boat with the current and made this play more smoothly. It was just that, in addition to his secret arrangements, it seemed that there was also another part of the power involved. So today, Zhang Ji's play was perfect. In fact, there was another person who contributed, but it was unknown what that person's purpose was and who did it. Suddenly, the face of the beautiful child in the palace hall flashed in Qi Feng's mind. His eyes slightly darkened, and he said, "They have already made their move." He raised the letter in his hand, and his gaze was profound. "If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, it would be hard to imagine that Xianli would take such a risk." Jiang Yuan unhurriedly picked up the cup of white tea in front of her and took a small sip. She then said in an indifferent voice, "Tonight, they cheated by replacing the beams with the pillars. That warehouse full of soldiers' pay was completely replaced with moldy rice grains and other supplies. Except for the outermost ones, the ones inside were all made up of straw. And with Zhang Ji's good play in the court today, there will be no more accidents tomorrow. Once the military provisions are safely transported out of the capital, the mountains will be high and the rivers will be long. And after the supply troops leave, the soldiers at the border will inevitably suffer. Without military provisions and provisions, sooner or later, they will run out of ammunition and food. When the whole army is wiped out, who will hold Zhang Ji accountable? Even if there are fish that escape the net, they can find ways to kill them one by one. It is indeed a good deal." Qi Feng took a deep breath and said, "Xianli is a prince of the great Jin dynasty, but for his own selfishness, he disregarded the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers at the border and regarded the territory of the great Jin dynasty as a child's play. It is really insane." Jiang Yuan looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. "Oh? Do you really think so?" When Qi Feng was looked at by those eyes, he immediately felt that his thoughts could not be hidden. He had always been clever, but he did not know why he often felt a sense of defeat in front of this young girl who was not even older than him. He scratched his head awkwardly and said with a smile, "Third sister-in-law, I have something to ask you. What did you let Jean Eyre take the genie guards to do?" Before Xiao Xiao left, he had handed over all the genie guards in the capital to Jean Wan and Jean Eyre. Jean Wan and Jean Eyre were all under Jiang Ruan's command, which was equivalent to Xiao Xiao handing over all the genie guards in the capital to Jiang Ruan. For Qi Feng, this was a very inconceivable thing. First, although the genie guards were secret guards, each and every one of them was an elite and virtuous person. However, outstanding people were always proud and arrogant. For them to willingly submit to Jiang Ruan, it was not easy for Jean Wan and Jean Eyre to be the heads of the genie guards. But when they heard Jiang Ruan's order, they went out without saying anything. This was enough to show Jiang Ruan's position in their hearts. Secondly, Xiao Xiao was not a person who easily trusted others. In his early years, he was even more accustomed to being a loner. Yet, he had handed over his hidden strength to Jiang Ruan. It was clear that Jiang Ruan held a special place in his heart. Jiang Ruan suddenly smiled, "Master Qi, you are smart and far-sighted. Why do you still need to speak in riddles in front of me? You clearly know why Xianli wanted to exchange the army's provisions in the warehouse." Qi Feng was startled and looked at Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan looked at him quietly. In the light of the fire, her smile was gentle and quiet, but her gaze was distant and deep, as if she was looking at the long years of the future through the fire. There was a clear understanding of the world in her gaze, as if she was a spectator who had watched the whole play and was watching it from the beginning again. She was just an outsider who was watching with cold eyes. No matter how the actors struggled and floated, she was always outside the world of mortals, clear-headed and cruel as she watched everything happen. He slowly shook his head and smiled bitterly, "Third sister-in-law, you are so smart that it is scary." "Yes, I know why. I have known for a long time that Xianli and Tianjin colluded. The intelligence of the genie guards is the best in the world. There is nothing that we do not know. Except for your secret," he added in his heart. "Yes, since Tianjin and Xianli have colluded, Xianli should at least show something. In other words, in this war, he must ensure that Tianjin will win." Such a large amount of military provisions will only be a hot potato in his hands. Xianli cannot leave these things in the capital. He can only think of a way to transport them out. And there is only one way to use this batch of provisions to the greatest extent and safely. Jiang Ruan said lightly. Send it to Tianjin as the Tianjin army's provisions. Qi Feng continued her words. It was so easy to talk to a smart person. Jiang Ruan smiled, yes, but Xian Li's method may not be good in my eyes. This method looks simple on the surface, but in fact, it requires a great price. It is because it is too dangerous that no one thought of it. Xian Li did the opposite and can be considered an ambitious and ruthless person. Moreover, to think of a way to transport it out, there must be a foolproof plan. I don't understand why you say it may not be good. Qi Feng said. He did not believe that Jiang Ruan, an unmarried woman, could compete with Xian Li, who was born as a schemer. Even if she could guess people's minds, the matters of the imperial court could not be achieved by scheming and winning people's hearts. No matter what you do, you can't leave behind any evidence. Jiang Ruan's eyes were slightly cold. Xianli left behind this batch of provisions. It is precisely because of this that I have the opportunity to break out of this situation. If I were in his position, I would never leave behind this batch of provisions. Once the things are exchanged, I will immediately burn them, leaving no trace. Qi Feng looked at her dumbfounded. You burned it? He could not see the ridicule in Jiang Ruan's eyes. What she said was the truth. Today, if she and Xianli exchanged positions, she would really burn the entire batch of provisions. God, how could she have such courage? What did she eat growing up? Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. Didn't you ask me what Jean Eyre and the others went to do? I will tell you now, they went to set the fire. Everything about Xian Li's plague is good, but it is a little lacking. But this is not up to him to decide. Qi Feng felt a chill in his heart and asked, set what fire? Do you still not understand? Jiang Ruan smiled gently. This time, I want them to beat their teeth out and swallow their blood. They will suffer a great loss, but they will not be able to say a word. Under the arrangements, the provisions in the warehouse had all been transferred to the place where they should be transferred. At this moment, in the warehouse of the eastern courtyard, someone closed the warehouse door and handed the key to Jiang Chao. The warehouse door was restored to its original appearance, as if it had never been opened. These things were restored to an excellent position, and everything looked no different from the day. Xia Jun stood beside Jiang Chao. He did not know why, but the uneasiness in his heart resurfaced, as if some subtle emotion was about to break through the soil. Jiang Chao looked at the scene in front of him with satisfaction and smiled. Now that everything has been settled, when I return and report to His Highness, I will certainly have made a great contribution. Once this matter was completed, Xian Li's great cause would be half successful. In this world, some of the rivers and mountains would be his meritorious service. In the future, he would certainly have a meteoric rise and his future prospects would be immeasurable. It was not in vain that he had spent so much effort on this. Darren, now that the matter has been settled, should we go back first? The guard asked. Go back. The two words had not yet left his mouth when a dong sound was heard. Something fell from the sky and suddenly hit the roof of the warehouse. It rolled down the slanted roof and rolled in front of everyone. The guards were all startled and protected Jiang Chao as they retreated a few steps. Seeing that there was no reaction from the thing, they picked up their torches and boldly went forward to investigate. With one look, the guard was so frightened that he suddenly sat on the ground and dropped his torch. His lips trembled as he said, Darren, Darren. Jiang Chao saw that the guard's appearance was strange and went forward to take a look. With one look, he was also shocked. The person on the ground was not someone else but the leader of the military supply team, Zhang Ji. At this moment, his entire body was stiff and there was a line of blood on his throat. His eyes were wide open and it was obvious that he was already dead. Jiang Chao had only been separated from him for 4 hours and did not think that when they met again, Zhang Ji would already be a corpse. He could not help but turn pale with fright. Before he could react, he heard several whooshing sounds and several black shadows flashed across the sky. No one saw how the warehouse door opened and no one saw how the sparks were drawn in. They only saw the sparks coming into contact with the hay and shooting high up into the sky. There was no need to incite them and they quickly rose up like a line of fire. In a flash, the entire warehouse was enveloped in a sea of fire. The rumbling flames almost lit up the entire street, making it as bright as day. The flames were the color of blood and faintly contained a layer of ominous aura. No one had expected that there would be such an unforeseen event. Jiang Chao and Xia Jun were both stunned on the spot. Those black-clothed men came and went without a trace and immediately disappeared. Xia Jun's heart moved and was about to give the order to retreat when he heard someone shout, "There's a fire, not good, the warehouse is on fire." Immediately after, the sound of hooves could be heard coming from the far end of the street, accompanied by the light of the torches. A loud voice shouted, "Audacious madman, you dare to set fire to the army's provisions. Arrest him for this official." Chapter 176. In the darkest cell of the celestial prison, two cells were next to each other, separated by a thick iron fence. Not only did the weak firelight not bring a trace of light to the already gloomy cell, but it also made it seem even more eerie. Jiang Quan grabbed Xiaoyu, "Did you hear me clearly? Only the Xia Fu's private army has nothing to do with the Jiang family?" No. After thinking for a long time, Jiang Quan made up his mind and said, "Now is not a good time. Write a letter for me and send it to Jinying Wang Fu. Tell Jiang Ruan to quickly return to the Fu. Her second brother has met with such a big accident, she must think of a way to save his life." The fact that the Xia family's private army had been caught on the spot was already a fact that they could not escape. If things continued to develop smoothly, the emperor would also wipe out the Xia family. Now that his great undertaking had not been accomplished, he still needed to rely on the Xia family's strength. How could he easily abandon this most important chess piece? If the Xia family were to fall because of this, not only would it chill the officials who followed him, but it would also cause him to lose a large part of his own strength. The Xia family must be saved. Wait. Xia Jun said, "Wait until 8th Prince finds a reason to exchange all the rations that were exchanged and tells the emperor that we were burning moldy rations and not the army's provisions. Then, this matter will be easily resolved." Jiang Quan sat where he was, the expression in his eyes fluctuating uncertainly. If it had been in the past, he would certainly have thought of a way to rescue Jiang Chao without a second word. But now, the Jiang family was not what it used to be. Their reputation in the capital was already ruined, and the emperor was quite critical of the Jiang family. This time, Jiang Chao had made such a big mess. This matter was too big, and it was impossible for Jiang Chao to escape unscathed. What was even more worrying was the emperor's attitude. If he entered the palace to plead for Jiang Chao now, would the emperor think that the Jiang family had also participated in this matter? Originally, he had only suspected that the Xia family had the intention to rebel, but this would suddenly implicate the Jiang family. What should he do? Before coming to the Jiang Fu, Xia Yu had already heard of Jiang Ruan's deeds. Regarding the matter of Jiang Ruan rectifying the Xia family and Jiang Quan, she had actually applauded. Now, hearing Jiang Quan's words, he could not help but feel a trace of contempt in his heart. Why did Jiang Quan need to speak in such a dignified manner? He himself did not dare to step forward, yet he was instructing his daughter to step forward. Jiang Ruan and Jiang Chao had never been on good terms, and Jiang Quan was well aware of this. How could Jiang Ruan be so willing to help Jiang Chao get off the hook? He did not know whether Jiang Quan had become so muddle-headed because he was too anxious. If he loses the Xia family, he would only lose his right-hand man. If he saves the Xia family, he could end his great career. Jiang Ruan said indifferently, "Xian Li's temperament is excessively suspicious. With such an opportunity to save the Xia family, he will instead hesitate and think that we have dug a pit behind his back to invite him into the urn. The more hesitant he is, the more he will not dare to make a rash decision. Jiang Ruan put down the weasel bristle brush in her hand. The elegant and beautiful hairpin-style small seal script in her hand was delicate and charming. The purple-clothed youth sitting opposite her could not help but ask, what if Xianli thinks of a way to rescue him? The Xia family won't be able to lose anything, and they'll even hold a grudge against you. After going through so much trouble, this is the result. He had always been used to using political trickery to scheme against everyone. This was the first time that he had accepted other people's arrangements and manipulations. He did not even know every part of this plan, and only followed Jiang Ruan's instructions. However, he was still confused, and did not understand what exactly she wanted to do. She spoke so confidently and solemnly that even if Jiang Quan did not want to believe her, he could not do anything about it. He said angrily, this unfilial son. He will definitely destroy the Jiang family. Jiang Quan was restless. He felt a cold sweat slide down his neck to his back. The emperor's suspicions were like a knife hanging over the Jiang Fu's head. But now, he only had this one son, so he could not ignore it. I hope so. Xia Jun looked at his own hands, but, he thought to himself, did Jiang Ruan really only manage to do this much? That woman was ruthless and merciless. If all of this had really been orchestrated by her, how could everything have been lifted up and dropped down so lightly? Just to let them suffer a little? The faint uneasiness in Xia Jun's heart once again emerged. He clenched his fists and no longer spoke. Jiang Chao shook his head, younger cousin, what you said is really too outrageous. If what you said is true, who is that person? Who has such great ability? On both sides of the iron fence, there were two people sitting against the wall. One was dejected and mournful, while the other had a gloomy and cold gaze, and his face was so gloomy that it could drip water. What method? Jiang Chao hurriedly asked. The fire burned for an entire night. That night, the common people of the Great Jin dynasty slept soundly, not knowing how many undercurrents had occurred. No one knew how the granary had caught fire. It was not until the next morning when the peddlers went to open their shops that they saw the granary with billowing smoke. The original carriage and horses were in a mess, and the inside was overgrown with ashes. It doesn't seem like they knew that we were going to set fire to the grain. Instead, it seems like they knew what we were going to do from the beginning and even pushed us along. Now that I think about it, the show that Zhang Ji put on that day was too perfect. I think that at that time, we had already fallen into someone else's trap without even knowing it, Xia Jun said. Last night, the fire in the granary came out of nowhere. It was clear that someone had purposely set it on fire to push the blame onto us. When the garrison came with their troops, I had clearly given the order that the private troops were not to fight impulsively, but there were people who took the initiative to draw their blades. Now that I think about it, it is too suspicious. It was clearly someone mixed in and purposely stirred up trouble. Seeing that Xianli did not speak, the advisor continued, right now, we can only think of a way to transport the provisions back and find a way to say that Xia Jun and Jiang Chao were burning the old provisions to protect the provisions. As long as we round up the matter and do it cleanly, it is not impossible. Your Imperial Highness, should we think of a way to rescue Xia Jun and Jiang Chao? The advisor opened his mouth. This matter also involves the Xia family. If we sit back and do nothing, His Imperial Majesty will certainly punish the Xia family heavily. The Xia family is still useful to your Imperial Highness, we cannot abandon them so easily. Xia Jun was startled and secretly cursed in his heart. However, without waiting for him to speak, he heard someone among his own troops draw his sword. He shouted, "Put down your sword." However, that person acted as if he did not hear him and continued to slash and kill. When Jiang Quan heard this, he almost fainted. It was not a big deal for high-ranking officials in the capital to have a private army in their manors. This private army was no different from the guards in the manors. There were not many of them, and the emperor had also tacitly approved of it. However, the crime of two people arson and a private army arson was very different. If it was just one person arson, it could be said that it was Xia Jun and Jiang Chao's own idea. However, once there was a private army, it would implicate the entire manners. Especially when this private army was fighting with the garrison. Wouldn't that be clamoring at the feet of the emperor? What would the emperor think? He would certainly think that they had long had the intention to rebel. Xianli was startled and seemed to realize something. His gaze darkened and he said, "No." The news that the second young master of the Jiangfu, Jiang Chao, and the second young master of the Xiafu, Xia Jun, had set fire to the granary in the middle of the night had spread throughout the capital on the first day. When Jiang Quan heard this news in the Fu, his hands trembled and he almost overturned his teacup. He stared incredulously at his new wife, Xiaoyu, beside him. "What did you say?" Jiang Chao looked at him in shock, his mind becoming increasingly confused. "Younger cousin, what do you mean? They and I have long been mortal enemies. Isn't it superfluous to talk about hatred?" Jiang Wan unhurriedly lifted the Xian paper and hung it out to dry. She asked, "Why did Xianli save him?" Jiang Quan was startled. Just now, his head had been spinning and he had only cared about Jiang Chao's audacity. But now, he truly felt a lingering fear. Indeed, 100,000 officers and soldiers were still waiting at the border for emergency provisions, but Jiang Chao and Xia Jun had set fire to the granary last night. In the dead of night, if one were to say that it was intentional, no one would believe it. If one were to say that it was intentional, then why would a proper son of an official's family do such a thing? Currently, the war between Jin and the Great Jin dynasty was the most sensitive area of the emperor's nerves. Jiang Chao stirring up trouble at this time was not to force the emperor to think in that direction, but to think that Jiang Chao had colluded with the enemy and committed treason. Otherwise, why would he rather destroy the granary and put the soldiers of the Great Jin dynasty in danger of running out of ammunition and provisions? Xia Yu looked at Jiang Quan somewhat timidly. She was merely the daughter of a distant cousin of the Xiafu. Originally, she also had her own childhood sweetheart. However, in order to rope in the Jiangfu and prevent the relationship between the Jiang and Xia Fu from being severed after Xia Yan's death, the Xia family had married her over. Currently, Xia Yu was only 17 or 18 years old, which was the age of a flower. Marrying Jiang Quan would allow her to be a person like her father, so naturally, she was resentful. Not long after marrying over, such a thing had happened in the Jiangfu. Xia Yu's heart was filled with even more resentment. However, one had no choice but to lower one's head under the eaves. On the surface, Jiang Quan looked gentle, but when he was angry, it was terrifying. She said, "Laoi, this is true. It has already spread outside." Naturally, he wouldn't dare. Jiang Wan suddenly laughed and turned to look at Qi Feng. Her eyes were beautiful and full of deep meaning. "Do you know where the 800 carriages of troops' provisions are now?" Jiang Wan looked at Qi Feng and suddenly smiled. "Is that so, young Master Qi? How about we make a bet? Abandon the army to protect the general." A trace of cruelty flashed across Xian Li's face. "Now, I have no other choice." "Who?" A charming and gorgeous face appeared before Xia Jun's eyes. That upturned coquettish eyes were slightly curved, as if mocking them for thinking themselves clever. Was it her? Although it was too inconceivable, Xia Jun had a hunch that this matter definitely had something to do with her. Chapter 177. However, Xia Jun and Jiang Chao were burning old rations, so where did the army's provisions go? With so many pairs of eyes watching, it was impossible to transport the army's provisions intact. Once Xian Li's secret passage was exposed, the emperor would be aware of his intention to rebel and would inevitably suppress him vigorously. Therefore, Xian Li's great cause would come to an end. He could not help, and even had to avoid arousing suspicion and protect the secret passage. This was destined to sacrifice the Xia family, and the Xia family's power was exactly what he needed. In this way, at least Xian Li's efforts over the past few years would go up in smoke. Qi Feng simply wanted to laugh. Jiang Ruan's move was really too ruthless. It was difficult for Xian Li to advance or retreat. In the end, he had to cut off a piece of raw flesh from his body. Then what should we do now? Find a way to inform His Majesty of Xian Li's secret passage? Qi Feng asked. If we say it now, Xian Li will have 100 ways to prove that the secret passage has nothing to do with him. Moreover, if His Majesty finds out, it will inevitably implicate Jinying Wangfu. Jinying Wangfu's position in the court is already awkward. If they are involved in this matter, there will be 100 disadvantages and no advantages. Jiang Ruan said, the most important thing is. Then what should we do? When Qi Feng saw that she unquestionably rejected this suggestion, he knew that she must have other ideas in her mind. He asked, third sister-in-law, do you have a good idea? I said that this time, I want them to swallow their blood and teeth. Even if they suffer a great loss, they will not dare to say it. A trace of hostility flashed in her eyes. Xiao Xiao still needs the 800 carriages of army provisions. I also want to thank Xian Li for transporting them intact. I want this batch of provisions. You? Qi Feng looked at her in surprise. After a long while, he suddenly burst into laughter. His laughter was extremely carefree. As he laughed, he said, third sister-in-law, your temperament is really happy. You are also bold and your idea is even better. If this matter succeeds, if I were Xian Li, I would definitely be so angry that I would be bedridden. You are really brilliant. Jiang Ruan declined to comment. At this moment, Lu Zhu pushed open the door and walked in. Seeing that Qi Feng was also there, she bowed and came forward to hand over a letter. She whispered, Miss, Master has sent a letter. Jiang Ruan took the letter and did not care that Qi Feng was present. She took out the letter and finished reading it in a short time. After reading it, she did not have any emotions and handed the letter to Lu Zhu, take it out and burn it. Lu Zhu went out as she was told. Qi Feng looked at her and asked, what happened to third sister-in-law? It's nothing. It's just that father feels that second brother is in prison. As a younger sister, I should do my part to save him. Her words were full of sarcasm. When Qi Feng heard this, he felt that it was harsh. He couldn't help but say, what kind of logic is this? As a father, even if he wants to help Jiang Chao, you shouldn't be the one to do it. You're just a lady, why are you involved in this? Has Jiang Quan gone mad? He's just a little naive. Jiang Ruan sneered, save him. I just want to watch him take one step at a time until he can no longer turn back. He has lived long enough. This time, I want his life. In Nanhua Yuan, the emperor waved his hand, and the eunuchs who were about to speak fell silent. Eunuch Li drove them all out. The emperor stepped through the door and saw the youth who was practicing calligraphy in the room. It was too early to say that he was a youth. He looked more like a child. He was born with a delicate appearance, and it seemed that every time he saw him, he was more stable and reserved than before. The emperor softened his footsteps. When he got closer, he saw the words written on the child's snow-white xian paper, those who love desire are like holding a torch. If they walk against the wind, their hands will be burned. His handwriting was excellent. It was as delicate as others, and there was not the slightest sharpness. However, this did not mean that the youth was really as harmless as his handwriting. In fact, everyone had a temper. When they were still young, they could judge a person by their handwriting. However, in this youth's handwriting, his heart could not be seen clearly. The emperor looked around and recalled Eunuch Li's report. The side palace hall that Xian Pei lived in was the most remote hall in the palace. It could not even compare to the private residence of a 7th-ranked official. Later, he vacated Nanhua Yuan, where the 4th prince had lived, for Xian Pei. The 4th prince had also been favored by the emperor. If not for the accident that happened later on, it was unknown what the situation would be like now. The emperor's action immediately aroused speculation among the court officials. Those with a bit of insight began to inquire about this 13th prince, who seemed to have no backing. Although he had the emperor's favor, Xian Pei did not have a strong maternal family, so people in the palace did not think highly of him. Even so, seeing that Nanhua Yuan was well organized and well arranged, and not extravagant, one could tell that Xian Pei was a person with means and ideas. The emperor looked at this child that he did not value, and a complicated feeling suddenly arose in his heart. Xian Pei seemed to sense his arrival and turned to look. After a slight shock, he saluted, "This son greets imperial father. Dispense with the formalities." The emperor waved his hand. "We have come to see you." It was difficult to hide the weariness between his brows. Such a big thing had happened in the capital. Jiang Chao and Xia Jun had burned down the granary, almost angering the people of the world. He could not restrain his anger. What was even more infuriating was the Xia family's contempt for imperial power. The Xia family's private army had dared to attack the army led by the garrison. Xia Cheng had pleaded for mercy, but he had been thrown into prison. Although his actions seemed rash, the Xia family had already incurred the wrath of the world. If he did not capture them, it would be difficult to quell the resentment of the world. Moreover, the country was still the Xian family's country. When was it the Xia family's turn to point fingers? As the emperor, he had to let the world know that if he wanted to crush the Xia family, it would be as easy as crushing an ant. It was not that he did not know that the Xia family had been stirring in the dark for so many years. He had turned a blind eye because he did not want to break the balance. Now, it seemed that some things could not be tolerated. Since the Xia family had proactively exposed this layer of skin, naturally, he had to suppress them with all his strength. Dealing with the Xia family was not enough to worry the emperor. What worried him was how to pay the army. The war had already strained the national treasury. The last time they had collected grain from the people was not long ago. Now that they had to do it again, how could they appease the people? Thinking of this, the emperor slowly furrowed his brows. Seeing this, Xian Pei thought for a moment. Is imperial father worried about the granary? The emperor suddenly looked at Xian Pei. His son's intuition was sometimes too sharp, especially now that he was only 8 or 9 years old. Why did he feel like he was facing a grown man? Slowly, he said, 13, what do you think about this matter? The Xia family has been disrespectful to the court. They have committed a crime and will be punished by imperial father. Xian Pei gently avoided this topic and said, in my opinion, the most important thing now is not to punish the Xia family or punish them. Instead, it is the problem of food for the soldiers at the borders. If there were any suspicions that he and the Xia family had some kind of plan, Xian Pei's words were enough to dispel all doubts. He did not mention punishing the Xia family, but instead brought up the matter of the army's pay. In one's position, one would naturally pay attention to matters in that area when considering benefits. For example, when Xianhua learned of this matter, he wrote a memorial that listed all the crimes of the Xia family. He did not think at all about the urgency of the war. Xian Pei could put aside his own interests and think of this point. Perhaps it was because he was still young, or perhaps he really did not care about politics. The emperor's gaze softened and his tone softened. It was as if a father from a normal family was treating his son and had the intention of testing his son's homework. He said, yes, the army's pay at the borders has all been turned to ashes, but the soldiers have to eat rations. What do you think? In order to protect imperial father's country, the soldiers of the great Jin dynasty shed their blood and laid down their lives, yet they are being played by their own people. The Xia family has let them down, but the imperial family cannot let them down. Otherwise, who will work for imperial father in the future? Who will protect this country? Xian Pei's tone still carried a trace of childishness, but his gaze was incomparably calm. But now, the frequent confiscation of rations does not care about the lives of the common people. Disregarding the will of the people, it will cause unrest among the people. But the national treasury is temporarily unable to produce this amount of money and rations, so we can only act in other ways. Xian Pei raised his head to look at the emperor. His eyes were naturally beautiful. At this moment, perhaps he had thought of a good idea. His pair of eyes sparkled, melting the hearts of those who looked at him. He was like a child presenting a treasure. He smiled and said, "In my opinion, Imperial Father can confiscate the Xia family. The Xia family has been in the Great Jin dynasty for so many years, they must have saved up a lot of money. Take out all the money in the Xia family, find a rich merchant to buy rations, purchase a new batch of rations, and transport them over. As for the Xia family, they have been officials in the court for many years. Imperial Father can, on account of their feelings, spare them from their death sentence and change it to exile. This gives them a chance to atone for their crimes, and on the other hand, it can demonstrate the benevolence of the royal family. What does Imperial Father think?" The emperor was silent for a while, not saying anything, but he still concealed a trace of deep meaning in his eyes. He had also thought of Xian Pei's idea before, but he could not make up his mind at the moment. Now, Xian Pei's words made him make up his mind. But, he looked at Xian Pei. Xian Pei looked at him with hope, like a good son waiting for his father's praise. He slowly reached out a hand to touch Xian Pei's head. Xian Pei's body stiffened, as if he was not used to such intimate contact. In the end, he stood without moving. The emperor sighed and said, "What you said is very good. I think this idea is not bad. The Xia family's influence in the court was too extensive. Capturing them all in one fell swoop would indeed alert the enemy and cause unnecessary trouble." Xian Pei's idea was very desirable. It could demonstrate the benevolence of the royal family and not alert the other henchmen. It could also give the Xia family a feeling that they did not need to be too pressured. The Xia family had amassed countless fortunes over the years, so they could raise a sum of money for the army. The emperor was surprised at Xian Pei's sensitivity to politics at such a young age. Although his idea for this matter was not perfect and had some loopholes, the general direction was not wrong. For a child, this was very good. He said a few more things to Xian Pei before hurriedly leaving. After the emperor left, Xian Pei stretched lazily and looked at the words on the table for a while before ordering a young eunuch to the side to take the paper and throw it away. He sat down on a chair, played with the paperweight in his hand, and smiled slightly. The Xia family had reached its end. The matter of the granary being set on fire raised a great wave in the court in Jing. However, before the officials could discuss it, the emperor's edict came suddenly. First, he sent the eldest grandson of the Zhao family, Zhao Yi, to lead troops to confiscate the Xia manor. The Xia manor's endless silver was put into the national treasury to prepare new provisions. All 183 members of the Xia residents were exiled. Jiang Chao, like Xia Jun, was also exiled to a desolate place in the northwest. Although the emperor's edict was swift and decisive, it did not put the Xia family to death. At least in the eyes of the common people, the royal family was merciful. However, the officials sensed a certain meaning from the emperor's action, and for a while, they did not dare to act rashly. When Jiang Yuan heard the news, she was drinking tea in the room. When she heard the news, she was slightly stunned and whispered to herself, "How can it be so fast?" As soon as her voice fell, she saw Qi Feng hurriedly walking in from outside. Recently, in order to deal with the Xia family, he often came here to discuss ideas with Jiang Yuan. Today, his expression was somewhat serious, but there was also a bit of joy in the seriousness. He said, "Third sister-in-law, it's done. This time, it's been hard on you." Jiang Yuan smiled, "With your help, things can be so smooth. I was about to talk to you about this." Qi Feng whispered, looked around, and shook his head, "I haven't had time to do this yet. It's not me who told the emperor. My people haven't started the plan yet. The one who prompted the emperor to issue the imperial edict is someone else." Jiang Yuan frowned, "Who is it?" "His 13th Highness." Qi Feng was also very strange. I heard that that day, the emperor went to his 13th Highness side hall to sit for a while. After he came out, he went to the imperial study to draft the edict. I think he must have heard something from his 13th Highness and made this decision. The teacup in Jiang Ruan's hand trembled, and a large drop of tea splashed out. Qi Feng was shocked by her action and said, "What's wrong, third sister-in-law?" Jiang Ruan lowered her eyes. Why would Xian Pei suddenly do such a thing? Today, according to his previous life, he was just a child who didn't understand anything. But since the last time she saw him in the palace, she felt a little strange. Now, he could even influence the emperor's actions. She had deliberately ignored the news of Xian Pei, so as not to bring trouble to Xian Pei. Now that she thought about it, it was very strange. It seemed that she had unknowingly missed something very important. A bold guess came to her mind. Could it be, Xian Pei could almost communicate with her telepathically, and even this time, he naturally pushed the boat with the current and gave the Xia family a fatal blow. If it was because of that reason, everything was not impossible. Qi Feng looked at her carefully, not letting go of any expression on her face. But after a moment, Jiang Ruan raised her head and smiled. No matter what, we have achieved our goal. Qi Feng was very regretful that he could not find out Jiang Ruan's thoughts, but he also knew that the girl in front of him never showed her emotions, so he felt relieved and said, "Yes, I think this time the Xia family will not be able to escape." Lian Xiao, who was sitting on the side sewing, heard this and asked curiously, "Miss, what do you mean?" His Majesty did not sentence the Xia family to death, which is clearly letting them off easy. When she heard this news, Lian Xiao was still very indignant. In her opinion, the Xia family wanted to exchange the army's pay and framed the genie guards. It was a heinous crime. Even death 10 times was not enough. They did not take action because they did not leave any traces. Qi Feng smiled and explained for Jiang Ruan, "Don't worry, we don't need to do anything. Naturally, there will be people who want the Xia family's life." The Xia family had been officials in the court for so many years. Although they were very involved, they had also formed many old enemies. For example, the 5th prince's people hated them to the point that their teeth itched. Moreover, the journey to the northwest was very long. How to safely reach the desolate northwest had become a difficult problem. They were confident that in less than 3 days, the Xia family would die suddenly. Chapter 178. From then on, where would the money to win over the officials come from? Xianli wanted to protect the secret passage and did not dare to let the secret of the secret passage leak out. Naturally, he had to sacrifice the Xia family and Jiang Chao. But the Xia family and Jiang Chao had worked under Xianli for so many years, they more or less knew what Xianli wanted to do. Xianli wanted to silence them, so how could he allow the Xia family to live? Jiang Ruan said, presumably, the Xia family believed that the result of being exiled was Xianli's idea. They thought that one day, they would make a comeback, so they obediently did not resist. In the end, they sent themselves onto a dead end. You guessed wrong this time. Qi Feng laughed. It was not done by an enemy of the Xia family. The people of Nanjiang gave me a muscle-weakening powder, so I could not use my martial arts. After you came, the amount of muscle-weakening powder decreased, and my martial arts slowly recovered. You did this on purpose. Who are you? Jiang Xing stared at her without blinking. He guessed that Jean was not an ordinary person, but he had no clue who she was. Looking at her appearance, she did not look like an enemy, but was she one of their own? But she looked a little strange. I. Jean was oppressed by Jiang Xing's questioning gaze, and her face gradually turned red. She stammered, "I am Yuan Mimi's friend. I came to save you." Yuan Chuan, the man in the gray cloak, stood quietly at a distance from the bonfire, but his gaze was somewhat gloomy. A soldier on the side raised a cup of wine to toast him. "Military advisor, this great victory was all thanks to your protection. Here's to you. How could there be a servant who did not even know how to clean the dishes, and did not even know how to serve the dishes? They did not even know the rules and etiquette. Mending and cleaning were a mess. For example, at this moment, the entire tent was covered in dust. Military pay, the guard's voice was almost crying. Military pay is gone. Every now and then, Yuan Chuan would capture Jiang Xing and interrogate him. The process of the interrogation was unbearable. When he came back, he was covered in wounds. Jean looked at him with tears in her eyes. Her distressed look did not seem to be an act. After a while, Jiang Xing also felt that Jean did not look like the enemy's spy. Jean and Jean San both looked at Lu Zhu. Lu Zhu noticed their expressions and took a step back, saying, "Why are you all looking at me? I am Mrs. Servant, not a roundworm in Mrs. Stomach." Thinking about it, she continued, "Moreover, Miss is now genieing Wangfei, your master. What is there to doubt?" Ever since Jean came, Jiang Xing's meals would often have a few more dishes. Naturally, that was Jean's good intentions. Although it was not necessary, Jean was very persistent about adding more dishes for him. She insisted on watching him eat all of her extra snacks. The advisor saw that Xian Li's expression was fluctuating and becoming more and more gloomy. He hurriedly comforted him, "Your Highness need not worry too much. No matter how remarkable that person is, at least we still have the 800 carriages of military pay. As long as there is this military pay, your Highness will not lose." With Xian Li's temperament, if he knew that the military pay had disappeared for no reason, he would definitely fly into a rage. This matter was very strange, but with the methods of the genie guards, Xian Li would not be able to find this place in a short period of time. In this way, Xian Li would be immersed in this matter every day. Moreover, with his suspicious temperament, he would inevitably suspect that his secret passage had already been discovered. This was the true meaning of killing without spilling blood. To let a person immerse in fear every day, no matter how tenacious that person's heart was also a kind of torture. This person had always put on a calm and wise appearance. It was rare to encounter such childish words. Jiang Ruan could not help but find it a little funny, and the corners of her lips slightly raised. Her usual smile was always a little cold, and it did not reach the bottom of her eyes. Under such a relaxed smile, her eyes were slightly curved, and the raised corners of her eyes were slightly lowered. It was a different kind of bright and beautiful color. Chi Feng could not help but stare blankly, as if his heart was touched by something. Then, he quickly lowered his head and said somewhat evasively, "In that case, this matter is also considered settled. Third sister-in-law, I still have some things to do, so I will take my leave first." After saying this, he hurriedly left. At the border thousands of miles away, everything was proceeding in an orderly manner. It seemed that they were completely unaware that such a thing had happened in the capital. However, at this moment, it was very lively outside the tent. The light from the burning bonfire illuminated everyone's face. A group of soldiers were cheering and enjoying themselves. From time to time, there were beautiful foreign women dressed in skimpy clothes singing and dancing. What do you know? Xian Li's face was as gloomy as water. "It's just a Xia family, I am not so depressed. What I am angry about is that after so long, the person behind this has yet to be found. A bunch of useless people." He spoke a little hurriedly, and his tone was a little breathless. The aides looked at each other and did not dare to breathe loudly. So today, these soldiers were here to celebrate. They were singing and drinking, and they were confident that victory was in their hands. Most probably, they did not know whether the war should continue or not. After all, the 100,000 genie guards would eventually become their prisoners, just like the people in the big tent now. When Du Pearl heard these two people say so, she immediately showed a proud smile and straightened her chest. "Of course, my miss is the best. Although it can't be said that everything is in the palm of the hand, at least if she wants to do something, she will certainly be able to do it." My miss is not only smart, she is also born beautiful. Looking at the capital, who can compare to my miss? Whoever marries my miss will really have picked up a treasure. Deputy General Jiang, I am your maid, this is what I should do. The young girl Jean Eyre returned a smile. These days, she seemed to play the role of a personal maid very well, as long as she did not look at those lame loopholes. Your Highness, please calm down. Seeing their master like this, a group of aides stepped forward to persuade, although the Xia family has fallen, it is not a complete loss. After all, the fifth prince has not made any big moves. Your Highness, please do not get angry and hurt your body. Where there is life, there is hope. This is the desert, you will only raise dust. Jiang Xing finally could not stand it anymore and couldn't help but speak up to stop her. The two of them were fooling around, completely ignoring the mischievous expressions of the people around them. This was also a secret passage, but it was not Xian Li's secret passage. Jiang Yuan had previously ordered to have someone guard the entrance of Xian Li's secret passage. Once the 800 carriages of troops' provisions arrived, they were to send someone to stop Xian Li's men and kill them. The genie guards were originally in the business of killing people, so naturally, it was a walk in the park. They used Xian Li's secret passage to send the troops out of the city, but they did not send them to another relay station. Instead, they were transferred to the secret passage of the genie guards. Jean Eyre stared blankly and turned her head away. Who knows, they probably think that victory is in their grasp and are randomly celebrating. Deputy General Jiang, you don't have to pay attention to them, these people will eventually be defeated. Xian Li suddenly stood up from his seat, his heart beating very fast. He stared at the imperial bodyguard without moving an inch. What happened? Her tone was serious and full of hope. Jiang Xing looked at her, the firelight in the tent casting a soft pearl halo on her face, even blurring the terrible scar. The young girl's pair of bright eyes were like spring water, inexplicably moving. Xian Li's face showed a little irritation. He had already sent many people to investigate, but they could not find anything. How great was the power of the person behind this, to be able to hide so deeply? Originally, only he and Xian Hua had a chance in the fight for the throne, but he did not know when the emperor started to value the 13th prince Xian Pei. Originally, he thought that Xian Pei's status was low, and he did not have the support of his mother's family. No matter what, he did not have the qualifications to compete with him for the position of crown prince. Now, he felt that this was not the case. The emperor's closeness to Xian Pei, even the once favored fourth prince, was not comparable. The emperor even let him use the crown prince's tutor, Lu Min. This was not a good sign. Hearing Qi Feng's words, Jiang Yuan was slightly surprised. She did not expect Qi Feng to do this. In fact, several of Xiao Xiao's martial brothers had the same habit of shielding their own. Guan Lianghan and Emo Tsong were quite critical of Jiang Yuan, but after these few days of getting along with Qi Feng, he felt that Jiang Yuan was truly blessed. People like him, who had superior intelligence, had always appreciated people who were as smart as themselves. In his eyes, Jiang Yuan's intelligence was close to that of a demon, and he really admired her very much. Since he regarded Jiang Yuan as one of his own, Qi Feng secretly inquired about Xia Jun and Jiang Chao's past conflicts with Jiang Yuan. He felt indignant for Jiang Yuan's misfortune, and finally understood why Jiang Yuan had suppressed the two of them. He did not feel that Jiang Yuan had done anything wrong. Instead, he admired her temperament of haggling over the smallest details. Naturally, he wanted to help Jiang Yuan vent her resentment. If Jiang Yuan wanted to do something, he would naturally help. Xian Li had always been a patient person. For the first time, he felt anxious and uneasy. A series of events was like a boulder, disrupting his calm heart. Seeing that he was lost in thought, Jean Eyre brought over the food on the side and said, "Today, everyone is celebrating outside. The food is good, Deputy General Jiang should also eat some." As she spoke, she opened the box of the food basket. Suddenly, a fragrant smell wafted into Jiang Xing's nose. Inside was a plate of roast beef and a few pieces of dusty dry biscuits. Jean C shook his head and said, "What unmarried woman? I think most men in this world cannot compare to her." Xian Li picked young madam as his opponent. He must have had 8 lifetimes of bad luck. He even calculated the emperor's thoughts. "I'm afraid that even if you have the idea, you won't have the guts." "That's right." Tianzhu also stood up and looked around before saying, "She is also your master. Pay attention to your status." Jean saw that her words had caused Jiang Xing to become so silent. She became anxious and said, "Deputy General Jiang, don't think too much. You must not give up. This battle will definitely end soon and you will also be saved soon. These people are just clowns. In the end, they will all suffer a crushing defeat." Listening to the way you speak, it seems that you are very smart. Jean walked over and knocked on Lu Zhu's head with one hand. "It's just that although young madam is smart and beautiful, it's a pity that the servant girls by her side are not that good." As she said this, she deliberately looked Lu Zhu up and down. Whoever married you is really unlucky." Jiang Xing looked at her quietly and suddenly said in a low voice, "Who are you? How do you know?" Qi Feng was stunned. All along, he had maintained a gentle and refined attitude. Even if he did something ruthless, the enemy was in the light while he was in the dark. He had always advanced step by step. However, he did not know when he started to encounter obstacles in everything he did. Xian Lang's death, He Yi's death, Xia Xia's fall, Imperial Consort Chen's loss of power. He did not know when it started, but he had lost all his advantages. It was as if there was an invisible hand pushing all of this, as if it was directed at him alone. He was in the light, but others were in the dark. They seemed to see him as prey, and step by step, they lured him into a trap. Yi Feng lowered his head in embarrassment. There were some doubts in his heart. In just a short period of time, Jiang Yuan had inadvertently subdued so many people's hearts. She probably did not realize that the embroidered uniform guards were becoming more and more adept at using them. The embroidered uniform guards under Xiao Xiao were actually not used to participate in the struggle of the imperial court. For so many years, they had not done these things. Now that Jiang Yuan wanted them to participate, no one objected. This in itself was already a kind of miracle. Although this was what was said, no one knew whether it was true or not. However, the mountains were high and the rivers were long. Since the corpse was still there, no one cared whether it was true or not. A duke of a generation had fallen and ended up in such a state. However, the common people were all clapping their hands in joy. A person who burned the army's provisions was really guilty of the most heinous crime. Who knew what kind of heart he had? Qi Feng guessed that Jiang Chao and Xia Jun had a grudge against Jiang Yuan. Now that Jiang Yuan had not been able to personally kill her enemy, she must be regretful. If he brought back the severed head, he might be able to compensate her a little. Unexpectedly, after Jiang Yuan recovered from her astonishment, she lightly said, "It doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want." Unlike the chaotic scene in the 8th Prince's Fu, at this moment, there was a joyous atmosphere in a certain place. No matter how brave the soldiers of the great Jin dynasty were, they could not withstand the swallowing of the barren grasslands. The rapid consumption of supplies was not something that anyone could bear. Without supplies, Tianjin had the advantage of being in a place where they did not have to worry about the Jin soldiers. What's more, they had heard that the Jin army's provisions had been completely burned. For the time being, there was no other way to replenish them. This meant that in the future confrontation, the great Jin would most likely run out of ammunition and provisions and be defeated without a fight. Jean stared blankly and put down the work in her hands. Somewhat embarrassed, she stuck out her tongue and said, "I'm sorry, Deputy General Jiang. I will stop now." If it were not for the large scar on her cheek that spoiled the scenery, this expression of hers would have been playful and cute. Her temperament was very good. No matter how cold Jiang Xing treated her, she could always finish her work happily. Although she was more of a hindrance than a help every day, sometimes Jiang Xing saw her bustling about and felt that she was a little cute. In fact, they did not have to wait for the third day. On the afternoon of the second day, the soldiers in charge of escorting the exiled prisoners sent a message by pigeon. It turned out that the 3 generations of the Xia family and Jiang Chao had committed suicide to escape punishment. As long as there was an organization, there would always be some secret rooms and secret passages. Although Jiang Ruan was not familiar with the embroidered uniform guard, she knew that such an existence definitely existed. In fact, there was indeed such a place. The embroidered uniform guard transported the army's provisions to their own secret passage and used another method to disguise themselves as merchants to deliver it to the border. Not only did this solve the problem of the army's provisions at the border, it also angered Xianli to death. Xianli has made his move, Jiang Ruan said indifferently, he is very courageous. Once the cunning hare is dead, the hound is cooked. Jiang Ruan did not care at all as she tidied up the account book in front of her. Ever since she had entered the Fu, Steward Lin had really treated her as the matriarch of the Jining Wang Fu. Even though she had declined, in the end, the account book and the key to the treasury were still handed over to her. She did not want to deal with these matters, but after all, it was Xiao Xiao's Wang Fu. It was not good for her to just wash her hands of it like this. She said, the Xia family has been Xian Li's sword in the court for so many years. They have many enemies. Since Xian Li has already been regarded as an abandoned son by the Xia family, it is even more impossible for him to do anything. If he was killed in the middle of the exile, it would not be bad to casually use the excuse of committing suicide to escape punishment. It's just a pity that he was freed so quickly. Jean San sat down on the ground and patted the dust off his clothes. He said, young madam is really clever, to be able to think of such a way to snatch food from the tiger's mouth. If I was that nuisance of a gentle prince, I would have hung myself with a rope long ago. I can't even compare to a lady in her boudoir, what kind of hero can I be? Although Jiang Ruan was a little puzzled as to why he had suddenly left, she would not waste her thoughts on this. Now that the Xia family had already fallen, she did not know what Xianli was thinking at this moment. She smiled slightly, but in her heart, a trace of joy slowly floated up. Xianli, just you wait. Wait to see your great cause of the country, slowly destroyed by my hands. Qi Feng thought about it and said, all right, then I will burn these 2 heads clean. I am not willing to let them be buried. In the tent, the young man looked at the young girl who was busy beside him and frowned slightly. You don't have to do this, just put it down. Composing himself, Xianli was about to summon someone to ask about the army's provisions when he saw an imperial guard scrambling in with an extremely flustered expression. He shouted loudly, Your Highness, it's not good, something has happened, something has happened. What was even more annoying was that this time, everything had originally been planned to be foolproof, but something had gone wrong midway. On the surface, it seemed that Xia Jun and Jiang Chao did not handle things well, but Xianli himself was very clear that there must be some other reason for the sudden arrival of the city's garrison troops. He just did not know what the reason was. He had also tried to make indirect inquiries, but unfortunately, that official was a block of wood and could not be pried open no matter how hard he tried. Perhaps, he really did not know anything. There must be someone controlling this matter from behind the scenes. As long as he thought that this person was actually so cunning and had been waiting for him to enter the trap, Xianli felt a chill run down his spine. What I find strange is, how did she know about Xianli's secret passage? Yi Feng muttered. This secret passage had not been used for so many years, and even the brocade guards had not been able to find out about it. Now, this was also the first time that Xianli had used it, but Jiang Ruan seemed to have already known about it. Every part of it was extremely detailed. For the brocade guards, who originally relied on intelligence, this was really somewhat unimaginable. Jean blinked her eyes. I stole a few pieces of dry biscuits, and I asked someone else for the beef. You should have a taste. Lecher, Lu Zhu immediately stood up in anger. Who are you talking about? Jean stared blankly at him. What? The person is already dead, and I have achieved my goal. Spending more effort on this matter is just a waste of time. Jiang Ruan said. In the eighth prince's fu, Xian Li's face revealed a depressed expression for the first time. The teacup in front of him had long been tipped over, and it was obvious that the host had just vented his anger. Yuan Chuan smiled as he took the cup of wine and drank it in one gulp. The firelight outlined his graceful and mysterious figure, and his beautiful chin was full of temptation. He turned to look at the soldiers who were singing and laughing merrily. Everyone's faces were full of joy, but why did the great Jin dynasty lose contact with the army's provisions after they were burned? This was not an ordinary matter. Those people of the Central Plains, who thought themselves elegant, loved to commit treacherous acts. Could it be that this alliance was not as reliable as it appeared on the surface? Or had there been some unforeseen event? Yuan Chuan slowly lowered his head. Today's dry biscuits were probably the same. The food that the people of Nanjiang had prepared for him was certainly not this. He was too lazy to haggle over it, and after eating a few mouthfuls, he asked, "Why celebrate? Army provisions?" Xian Li slowly calmed down. Thinking about the army provisions, his depression slowly dissipated. That's right, he had not lost yet. The 800 carriages provisions were still in his hands. As long as he had the provisions, he could send them to Tianjin in exchange for most of the benefits. It would take some time for the Xia family's silver to be used again to raise the army provisions. In this battle, he might not necessarily be the loser. Although it could not be said that the brocade guards could catch all of them in one fell swoop, the brocade guards were not certain to win. Now, the army provisions were being transported non-stop through the secret passage to the courier station outside the capital. As long as they reached the courier station, the 800 carriages provisions would have nothing to do with the brocade guards. You don't hate them? Seeing Jiang Ruan's indifference, Qi Feng was startled and asked uncertainly. When Qi Feng returned with the news, he saw that Jiang Ruan only responded indifferently and said, "Third sister-in-law, why do you look so careless? Aren't you afraid that they have been rescued?" Xian Li himself had sent people to kill the Xia father and son in order to avoid future trouble. Such a move was tantamount to cutting off an arm. Although he kept saying that the Xia family was not important, for so many years, many of Xian Li's matters had to be completed through the hands of the Xia Fu. This was a good knife that he was used to using. Seeing that the battle for the throne was so close at hand, he had to change his knife at the last minute. To him, how hateful was this? What's more, the emperor had taken away all the Xia family's wealth, which meant that the silver that he originally received from the Xia family every year was now all gone. Qi Feng touched his nose. Your guess is 80 to 90% correct. He said, the brocade guards were sent to keep an eye on them. When the Xia father and son and Jiang Chao found out that Xian Li had sent people to silence them, their expressions changed. Unfortunately, they were one step too late, and it was too late to regret. Third sister-in-law, I acted on my own initiative to exchange the heads of Xia Jun and Jiang Chao. He looked at Jiang Ruan's expression. Third sister-in-law, how do you want to deal with this? Xian Li's most intelligent advisor looked at him with some worry. Xian Li had always walked more steadily than others. Now that his heart was in a mess, this was a big taboo. Once his heart was in a mess, it was easy to make mistakes. If all this was really being manipulated behind the scenes, that person would definitely not let go of Xian Li's mistake. With a "pa" sound, Xian Li's teacup suddenly fell to the ground. You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.